Live from the Lawrence Herbert School of Communication, this is Hofstra Votes Live, Hofstra University's special coverage of the 2020 election. We'll have the latest results from the presidential, senatorial, and congressional races, as well as in-depth coverage of issues affecting this year's election. Airing live on Facebook, YouTube, the Heat Network, and WRHU 88.7 FM Radio, Hofstra University, in partnership with the Hofstra Chronicle. And now, from Hofstra University, Hofstra Votes Live. From the national team, I'm Juliana Battaglia, and we will be giving you all the latest updates on the closing polls and results from around the country. Tonight, you'll be receiving continual live updates from all around the Lawrence Herbert School of Communication, as well as from remote correspondents live at the polls and in the Midwest. We'll be reporting to you from both our national and regional desks, as well as right here with our Decision Desk experts. Faith, the head of Decision Desk, is here to tell us a little bit about what will be taking place here. Faith, can you tell us what you're going to be doing tonight?
Yeah, so the Decision Desk is all about results tonight. We already have results coming in, and this is where all that action is happening. We have maps, we have numbers, it's all coming in right here. Our analysts are working extremely hard to make sure everything's up to date when we are able to call races. So it's going to be a super exciting night, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Faith. Now we're going to take it over to our national desk with Crystal.
Hello and welcome to the national coverage of Hofstra Votes Live. I'm Crystal Bermudez. Alongside me tonight is Eli Finkelson and Eddie Fitzgerald. In the era of COVID-19 and a continued fight for civil rights, tonight's presidential race is one like we've never seen before. Eddie and Eli, what can we expect to see tonight?
Well, the one thing I don't want to get everybody's hopes up for, Crystal and Eli, is that we'll have a definitive answer on who will be the president of the United States. I want to make that very clear, that the amount of mail-in ballots that have been sent in that have yet to be counted in certain states will not decide this election. I would be remiss if I did not mention that at the start of this broadcast.
But we do have several states that are already reporting votes, so we will have some results to report for you. South Carolina was just called for President Trump with about 3% of votes were being recorded. Places like Virginia have been called for former Vice President Joe Biden, with the percentage already coming in.
But we cannot forget about Florida. Florida is the key to that 270 Electoral College win. Crystal?
Well, Eddie, what are you most excited for tonight, if anything?
Well, I'm just very excited that we are going to have the opportunity to cover this election. There has been a lot of things that have gone on this year, and the fact that we have the ability to do this and be here tonight, that's truly remarkable, Crystal.
And I'm most excited to talk about swing states. There are so many key issues that are so important to voters all across the country. I'm excited to really delve into what is most important to voters across the country, take a look at which states have the most voters that are important, that have issues that are important to them. Crystal, what else do we have in store for this evening?
Well, Eli, we have a lot in store for today. We have a package to look forward to and many more things. Again, like how you guys said, I'm very excited to see how this night is going to lead. And we're going to lead off to Juliana.
Off to the small wall.
We're here now at the small wall, where we have multiple projections and breaking news coming out of a bunch of states tonight, especially in the South. As we move here, we see that the president has won. We are projecting that the president has won the state of Kentucky, carrying 8 electoral votes. Of course, this was a state that he carried in 2016 by 30% of the vote, and tonight we see with 42% of the expected vote in, we are projecting that state for the president. As we move along a little more toward the east, we see that West Virginia, with its 5 electoral votes and 5% of the expected vote, has already come in, and we are projecting that President Trump is actually winning the state as well. Now, with those 5 electoral votes, we're seeing that in 2016, this was a state the president won by 43% of the vote. Of course, we're going to be looking to those margins tonight to see if they hold for the president. As we move more to the east, we have Virginia with 20% of the expected vote coming in, calling this state tonight for the former Vice President Joe Biden. As we move toward the north, we see that the state of Vermont, with 3 electoral votes, has also been called for Joe Biden. especially with all these states already being called in the South and in the East. We're going to be keeping you up to date at the decision desk. Crystal, back to you.
Tonight, we have so much to look forward to. We'll be taking a look at important issues affecting the election, as well as keeping a close eye on the polls. The determination of who gets elected relies heavily on what happens in swing states. So we'll be watching closely as results come in across the country. For now, let's check in with our live view to discuss the state of our presidential and senatorial elections. And we have so much to look forward to. We have amazing states looking to as far as Florida, one of the key states, 29 electoral votes. And we are now have more coverage to look forward to. We have Amdallah, who's covering the Midwest, and we'll be giving a closer look to states like Indiana.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here in Minnesota, and I'm covering the tight races out of the Midwest. Minnesota and Wisconsin both have tight presidential races, speaking on what Eli said about swing states. Iowa has a key Senate race, and I will be covering Illinois, South Dakota, and North Dakota as well. Issues on COVID-19, police brutality and race, and economics are key issues that I will be focusing in on here today. And that's all for now. I'm Amdallah Dajasa, and I'm tossing it to the regional team.
Hello, and welcome to the regional coverage of Hofstra Votes Live, streaming on YouTube, Facebook, the Heat Network, and WRHU Hempstead, 88.7 FM Radio Hofstra University. I'm Frank Shields, and I'll be one of your anchors tonight, along with Rachel Lucier and Max Sacco. We'll be covering a wide range of topics tonight, from coronavirus to civil rights. Obviously, tonight is an important night, not for only New York, but our nation as a whole. Max, Rachel, what are you most looking forward to tonight?
Well, thank you very much, Frank. For me, at least, what I'm most looking forward to is seeing what's going to happen with these blue waves and red waves that they talk about around the country. We've heard in our regional side that a couple districts in New York that typically vote blue might get swept by a red wave and go Republican this year. At the same time, we've heard districts like Districts 1 and 2 that typically go Republican might hit the blue wave and go Democrat. So I'm interested to see in what happens and which districts are going to flip, or if everyone's going to stay the status quo. Rachel, what about you?
Remember, everything that happened this year is leading up to this night and this election, and I'm so excited to see how New York votes after enduring so much this year. Frank, what are you looking forward to?
What I'm looking forward to most is some of the individual district elections, such as Long Island's District 2 race between Andrew Garbarino and Jackie Gordon. Also, I'm really interested in swing states like Pennsylvania and at what their vote will ultimately decide. And of course, Max, Rachel, I'm really looking forward to those voting results. I want to see what those polls say by the end of the night.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on, what these polls say and what the polls are going to look like. Already a couple coming in. It looks like Connecticut and New Jersey have gone blue. It looks like their votes are going to Joe Biden. 0% reported right now. Rachel, I don't think it's a surprise that those two states are going to Joe Biden.
Well, remember, going back to the main two topics we're talking about tonight, civil rights and the coronavirus pandemic, those two things defined and shaped our year, so they will definitely impact the election. Remember, the tri-state area has worked together in these tough 9 months to combat the coronavirus pandemic, and we're still fighting. And New York City is the former epicenter of the virus. Extremely tough times in the city with the population density. Even reopening, people had doubts that cases would spike again. And another issue that really opened our eyes in 2020 is civil rights and the civil unrest we've been seeing in this country for the past 5 months. We've seen that here on Long Island and in New York City, counter-protesting for BLM groups and pro-police and pro-law enforcement groups on Long Island. So we have that experience, seeing that live this summer and still ongoing. Max, what are some key races we're following tonight on Long Island?
There's a lot of race that we'll be following on Long Island, but two key race, that we'll be looking at is District 1 and 2. District 1, all in Suffolk County, stretching out all the way from Montauk and the Hamptons to about Northport in that region. District 1 will have Lee Zeldin facing Nancy Goroth. Goroth, a former chemistry professor at Stony Brook University. Zeldin, the incumbent, looking for his fourth term now. On the other hand, in District 2 is the only district on Long Island that covers both Nassau and Suffolk County. Peter King, after 28 years of civil service, retires, and now that opens up a door where it's Andrew Garbarino versus Jackie Gordon. Gordon, a former military member, and also works in civil service before. Garbarino, an attorney. So it'll be interesting to see what these two have, as Jackie Gordon has received support from multiple newspapers, Joe Biden, and many key political figures, but Garbarino does have the support of Peter King himself afterwards. So Rachel, those are the two biggest races I'm looking at in this year's election.
Even as you mentioned in District 2, it's received national attention. Jackie Gordon has been endorsed by Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and former President Barack Obama, and endorsed by Newsday. So that's a key race. It's a target state, very important in terms of for the Democrats to keep the House. Now over to New York City, District 11 is a key race. Pollsters are saying it's going to be very tight because Staten Island is the only swing borough in New York City, so that's going to be extremely interesting to find out who takes the win for District 11.
Thank you, Max and Rachel. Tonight, we're going to have regional correspondents focusing on New York City, Long Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. We'll also be reporting election results for these three regions throughout the night. We're going to take a quick break, but Hofstra Votes Live will be back in a moment with our... We'll be back in a moment, and we'll be going over to our national anchors.
Tonight, we will be taking a look at important issues affecting the election, as well as keeping a close eye on the polls. The determination of who gets elected relies heavily on what happens in swing states, so we'll be watching closely as results come in across the country. For now, let's check in with our live view to discuss the state of our presidential and senatorial elections. Jordan?
Thanks, Crystal. I'm here outside at the East End Firehouse polling station located in Hempstead, just a half a mile away from Hofstra University's campus. Just inside over here, voters are signing in and casting their vote for the 2020 presidential election. Here in Long Island, voters had three methods to vote this season: absentee, early in person, and voting in person tonight on Election Day. Due to the pandemic, Nassau Board of Elections revealed that almost 150,000 people requested an absentee ballot, which is triple the amount from the 2016 election. The early voting period ended this past weekend on November 1st, where in the first 2 days, Long Islanders, a total of 55,000 people, casted their vote. They have proven their commitment to stand in long lines and enduring the cold weather. Over the 9-day period, COVID-19 has changed the stakes for the presidential election and all the campaigns for the presidents. Voters are more motivated than ever to vote this election season, and I'm hoping to conduct some exit polls on voters that are standing outside and voting tonight. More than 100 million people have already casted their ballot nationwide. Tonight, we have seen not a lot of people coming through the polls, and I'm hoping to catch some people to get their opinions on how they voted this election season and just their expectations. And I'm Jordan Chacon, reporting for Hofstra Votes Live. Back to you guys.
Now let's go to our newsroom for an update.
All right, thank you, Crystal, so much. Now we're going to take a look into the newsroom to see how exactly they're going to be covering the election tonight. Joining me right now is National Newsroom Manager Josh Mehta. Thank you so much for joining us today. So the first question is, what exactly is the newsroom and its purpose?
So the newsroom is the hub of research for Hofstra Votes Live. We have compiled all of the research that goes into tonight's broadcast so that our anchors are prepared to talk about them. We've had students tracking every single state and every key congressional race that's happening.
All right, and now what was the preparation like in terms of getting ready for the election?
So the first step was to figure out who was going to be monitoring what. Once we did that, I had them pay special attention to any toss-up congressional races happening in Senate and the House of Representatives, just because that's what is most likely going to impact this election cycle the most. We also had them tracking swing states in great detail, so that way anything that happens, especially if a state flips, we would be prepared to cover it.
All right, and now Joshi, what can we expect specifically tonight? We know that some votes may not be counted in every state, but what can we expect tonight?
So we're definitely not expecting to have many results in, but the newsroom will be looking out for any kind of breaking news that particularly involves any kinds of protests that might be breaking out, any kind of signals of voter suppression, especially if lines are long and people are starting to get turned away. In past elections, there have been issues with electronic mailing systems failing, so that's also something that we'll be looking out for tonight.
All right, Joshi Mehta, thank you so much. And now we're going to turn over to the National News Desk. Back to you guys.
And welcome back, everyone. We have updates on battleground states like Florida, Ohio, Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Eli and Eddie, what can we see with these states? What to expect if either former Vice President Joe Biden or current President Donald Trump, what are the necessary key states that they need to do in order to win? Well, let's start off with Florida. Florida has not been impressive for Biden so far. It is carried statewide that he is just below the margin to beat out Trump in this one. I'm not going to call it yet. We do not have that information just yet. But we need to talk about Miami-Dade County and the work that President Trump has put in over the past couple weeks there. He has been able to manipulate the voter base and get them to swing his way. And the Democrats have poured over $100 million into Florida for this election. And for this poor of a showing, it's looking pretty good for 45 right now.
Other than Florida, we've got several states that are already reporting and have been called. South Carolina has been called for President Trump. Virginia has been called for former Vice President Joe Biden, as has Maryland, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Vermont, and Illinois. States that have already been called, according to the New York Times, for President Trump are Oklahoma, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Let's talk about the Kentucky race for a second, because that's really interesting. That was one of the first races that we saw called tonight for President Trump.
Yeah, and it was also called for Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, who, again, the Democrats spent millions of dollars trying to unseat Mitch McConnell with Amy McGrath, and they were unsuccessful, and it was one of the quickest calls of the night so far.
Yeah, it was one of the first calls that we got. Other races that are interesting. Virginia was one of the first places to be called, and we're still waiting on results for Georgia. Now, I think everyone has sort of underrated Georgia in terms of how crucial it is for former Vice President Joe Biden, as well as North Carolina. Now, there are three states that we're really talking about here in terms of importance. We're talking about North Carolina, we're talking about Florida, and we're talking about
you got to mention Georgia at this point.
Correct.
The path to 70. For either Biden or Trump has to hold North Carolina or Georgia with it. Biden has a chance if he loses Pennsylvania and Georgia and Arizona to still make up the ground with Michigan and Wisconsin. But early signs coming out of Michigan and Milwaukee as well of low voter turnout could be very surprising. We could see another shift as the night goes on.
No, right now, if we're talking about North Carolina, we're actually seeing Trump ahead in the polls because of in-person voting. But I think what we need to be looking at right now is the forecast. We need to be looking at how many votes are coming in from mail-in ballots that won't necessarily all be counted tonight.
Well, Crystal, I also want to get your take on this. Is there a race that you're particularly looking at this point in the night?
I'm closely looking at Pennsylvania, really, because it's one of the crucial swing states, and it could really highly influence the whole election itself. It's considered one of the tipping point states, and really, Donald Trump has already expressed that if he thinks there is a mistake going on with Pennsylvania, that he will not hesitate to get lawyers involved after the election.
Now we're going to go to the small wall with Stephen.
First, they said cigarettes were safe. We know how that turned out. Now, they say they didn't market e-cigarettes to teens? Fact, more than 1 in 4 high school students are vaping, and 80% say their first e-cigarette was flavored. Vaping is harmful to developing brains. The reason we think vaping is safe? Marketing. Same lies, different day. Tell Big Vape to quit lying.
There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. She gave them some broth without any bread and kissed them all soundly and put them to bed. Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org.
Welcome back to Hofstra Votes Live, the School of Communications live election night coverage.
We have some news regarding the results of the races in New Jersey and Connecticut. Both of these states are projected to be won by Joe Biden. To discuss these results, we're going to bring you to our New Jersey and Connecticut correspondent, Danny DiCrescenzo.
And it looks like a little bit of a win here. I mean, both of these states have not voted red since the election of Ronald Reagan.
But I am not surprised. Both states are reliably blue, especially looking at Connecticut. All 5 congressional districts are blue and have been for a while. As you mentioned before, it's not a surprise these states did go blue. The support was for Biden in these states. Frank, what's your take on this?
I agree. Both Connecticut and New Jersey have been blue since 1992. Hillary Clinton won both of these states back in 2016. It's clearly not a surprise that Joe Biden has taken both of these states. Now we're going to take it over to Danny DiCrescenzo, our correspondent for New Jersey and Connecticut. Danny, what information do you have for us?
Thank you, Frank. Obviously, no surprises here for Joe Biden. This is honestly a layup for him. And you need to look at the demographics in these 2 states. A lot of minority voters, both in New Jersey and Connecticut. And that's going to be the key for Biden in terms of what happens later in this election. How well can Biden mobilize these minority voters? He's passing the earliest and easiest of tests in the Northeast, a so-called blue wall, as it is known by pundits. He's going to have to translate that to the Midwest and even down south to Georgia in terms of if he wants to win these southern counties. But back to the main point, yes, Biden won these states handily. It's a layup for him. He's just going to have to carry this momentum. He's a guy that appeals to the liberal progressives of the Northeast. That appeal has to translate all over the country. Frank, back to you guys.
So, Max, Rachel, do you have any more information about this? What are your reactions?
Again, I'm not surprised here. It wasn't the result we expected. It's a number we expected. And I think more than that, it was interesting that Danny brought up, and I thought this was a good point he said, about that minority voters were going to turn out big, and it supported Biden. In New Jersey, one of the 10 biggest places where minority people do move, or people from Latin American countries will move up to the U.S. to go for work. New York, number 1, but New Jersey, it goes into that a bit as well. So a big push there, and it did help him out at the end. And it's something we expect, and again, not a surprise.
The 2020 presidential election is one of the most important elections of our lifetime due to the multitude of key issues that are affecting voters' decisions. Here tonight to provide us with some insight into these key issues are Dr. Mina Bose. Dr. Bose is Executive Dean for Public Policy and Public Services Programs, Peter S. Kalkow School of Government, Public Policy, and International Affairs, and Director of the Peter S. Kalkow Center for the Study of the American Presidency. Welcome, Dr. Mina Bose.
Thank you for having me. Exciting night. Hello?
This year is unprecedented. Early voting broke so many records across many states. In New York, about 2.2 million New Yorkers cast their ballots early. About 1 million of those were from New York City. Max, what's your take on early voting?
I think that's something this year that before I think everyone knew it was just kind of an option. You knew it was something available for you. You know, maybe you use it, maybe you don't. But this year it really came to the forefront with COVID-19 and that people were afraid to go to the polls. You were afraid to go out to get sick. You wanted to protect at-risk populations like the elderly. So this is a new style, not even a new style, but a new wave of people going for mail-in voting and absentee ballots, and a way to get votes out and get your voice heard and still get to practice your American right.
And even talking about the passion, people endured long lines and long waits to get their voice to be heard. They endured unprecedented conditions to get their voice. There's a period of 9 days for New York to have early voting. It was tough to find a space to hold for that long. But we did break records in terms of early voting, and so did New Jersey. About 3.5 million New Jersey residents have cast their ballots early, making up about 88% of the total votes in 2016. Now, Frank, what's your opinion on that statistic?
Obviously, Rachel, I'm not surprised by the statistic. Obviously, people are very concerned about the way they go in voting this year. And even though there's been a lot of conflicts surrounding the way they do, they've managed to find a way. But actually, we're going to go over to Dr. Mina Bose. Dr. Mina Bose, how are you doing?
Boy, what an exciting evening. It looks like it could be a long night.
Some technical difficulties on this crazy night. So let's talk about voter turnout. How would you describe that this year is so unique and so different to other elections? Because about 25% of Americans did cast their ballots absentee in 2016, and obviously, as you know, there is an influx of mail-in voting. How will that affect the election?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. It was just going in and out. Obviously, thanks. Okay, so obviously this is historic early voting, more than we've ever seen. And of course, due to the pandemic, that is not surprising. The real question today is on November 3rd is what about the votes that come in today? What do the early voting numbers show? And of course, what do the absentee votes show? So we kind of have three sets of votes that have to be calculated. And it is really at this point in the evening, we're waiting to see what the projections are for the states. Florida, hoping to hear some assessments soon, had said we might get a projection tonight. Florida will either be indicative of the race coming to a close or going into a long night. Right now it appears to be the latter, but no call's been made. And then from there we go into numerous other battleground states and states that originally weren't anticipated as battlegrounds, but have come into that category: Texas, Ohio, Georgia, North Carolina, in addition to, of course, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan.
And thank you very much again, Doctor. Thank you very much. It'll be a long night for sure, and it'll be interesting to see how this night plays out. And Rachel, there's a lot left for us here. You and I obviously covering the regional coverage along with Frank. New York City, a lot of districts, districts 6 through 16 in the entire scheme of the New York district map. A lot of races, and you yourself said you're interested in District 11 for the swing borough of Staten Island. But Rachel, I think what we all want to know is what can you expect and what other races are going to be interesting tonight, or which high-profile candidates are you looking for?
Well, New York City is one of the most diverse areas in the entire world. Its dense population does heavily affect which way the state does vote and is responsible for and holds the state accountable for voting blue because of the population density in the 5 boroughs. We're looking at a lot of tight races. Some aren't really surprised. We have districts that are some of the most Democratic nationally. District 15, the most Democratic congressional district in the nation. So we're looking at a lot tonight, and for more on that, we have Athena Dawson, our New York City correspondent. Athena, what can we expect tonight out of New York City?
Just say yours, Sam.
Okay, so
Looks like a little bit of a technical error. I'm sorry there, folks. But other than New York City, Long Island as well, a couple very important races to look at as well at the Long Island race. Obviously, you have District 1 and District 2, the high-profile races. You also have Districts 3 and 4 that are also up for contention. District 3 featuring Tom Swazi and District 4 featuring Kathleen Rice. District 4, one of the most diverse districts on Long Island, covering all the way from Hempstead to Long Beach, so a lot of different areas of income and wealth and a lot of things in that area. Sam, what can you tell us a bit more about the District 4 race?
Hi. So I'm really excited about the NYC races, specifically covering District 11, because I feel as though for District 11, what's really interesting about them is that this is covering Staten Island, and Staten Island is considered a swing district. That's because for the past couple of years, Staten Island was actually covered by a Republican. And right now, Max Rose is covering this district. So it's really going to be interesting to see what's going on. I'm also really interested about District 6, Grace Meng, and Thomas Mick, the Republican Thomas Mick. What's interesting about Grace Meng, the Democrat, is that she covers Cambria Heights, Far Rockaway, and Jamaica. And that district is 49% Asian and 36% white. So it's really interesting to see what her policies are going to be and if she can win that district. In addition, I'm really interested in District 14 between AOC and new Republican challenger, John Cummings. Now back to you guys.
And Athena did mention District 6, that's my home district, Democratic incumbent Grace Meng versus Republican challenger Tom Mitch. Now, Grace Meng is the first Asian American to be elected in District 6, a place with a population of almost 50% Asian American residents, so that's extremely interesting to see if she can pull that off. She's running for her 4th term. She assumed office in 2012. That's a key race we're expecting to broadcast tonight.
It is, and District 6 specifically, one of the most diverse districts in the nation, considered the 3rd most district populated by Asian Americans in the entire nation. And it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Rachel, they mentioned AOC as well. You have to say for her, that might be an easy win for her considering her notoriety and huge status.
And AOC has only been in Congress since 2018. She's running for her 2nd term. She definitely made an impact in just 2 years. She's running for her 2nd term here. She definitely has a lot of support of the younger generation, and she does support Bernie Sanders, and she has back in the primaries and also during the Democratic National Convention.
Yes, and the Democratic National Convention, one rule is every candidate must get announced. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was able to announce Bernie Sanders. And now we are going to move to our small wall to see how races are going, not just regionally, but nationally.
President has a slight lead electorally over the current president, Donald Trump. We see former Vice President Biden has 85 electoral votes and President Trump with 61 electoral votes. Of course, the popular vote is still extremely close and will change over the night, and we are still very early into this night. Now, as we look to a couple key races, we want to look to the state of Virginia. Now, Virginia has been called for former Vice President Joe Biden with 32% of the vote in. And Virginia is a very important state this election, as there are 3 House races, more specifically in District 2, District 5, and District 7. So we're going to be looking at how this presidential vote now turns out down ballot and what that looks like for those races in those House races there. As we move to a state like Kentucky, we have another very important race down ballot, with this being the Senate race. Of course, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is projected to win that seat back again, and this is a big win for Republicans. As we know, this is an important seat, a seat that has helped them get a Supreme Court nominee on the court just recently. So these are important numbers for both camps, and we're going to see how those numbers translate throughout the night. As we move further north and we look to states like Vermont, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, these states have been called for former Vice President Joe Biden. Not a surprise here. However, we want to see what those margins are like, and also each one of those electoral votes is going to count if this is a close race. We're going to see how those votes add up throughout the night. And of course, we want to see what that actually means also for the battleground states, especially states like Pennsylvania, which right now are leaning toward Joe Biden, but are still way too early to call in the night. Of course, we have the industry of coal and oil in states like Pennsylvania, which we know from West Virginia is actually leaning strongly toward President Trump. This is something President Trump has pushed throughout the night, and we're going to see if that can carry all the way to Pennsylvania with those voters in that state. Now back to you, and we'll be checking in throughout the night.
Welcome back to the national side of things, where we have a breaking news update for you, where 14,000 ballots in South Carolina will not be counted as of right now due to a printing error. We're going right now to the newsroom for an interview on voter suppression with Jermaine. To the newsroom.
Thank you, Eli. Now, concerns about voter suppression on both local and national scales have been extremely prevalent throughout the 2020 election cycle. In one of the most bitterly contested elections in recent memory, thousands are concerned about their voices not being heard. To learn more about this issue, I'm here alongside Emma Des-Simone, and she's a student expert in regards to voter suppression. So, what does voter suppression look like, Emma?
Well, right now in South Carolina, 14,000 votes in Dorchester County cannot be counted due to a printing error. And they only noticed it this morning when they started counting.
Now, in what ways has voter suppression grown in this election?
Well, obviously printing errors have grown and mail-in ballots have been especially concerned about voter suppression, especially due to the slowdown of the USPS, as well as long lines and voter intimidation.
And Florida has seen some of the worst cases of race-based voter suppression. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yes, so Florida actually, in their constitution 2 years ago, voted to let felons have the right to vote after they get done with their sentence, but they now have to pay what is now a poll tax, and so since a lot of the prisoners are people of color, it's going to affect them disproportionately.
And how does the state's election measures influence of people of color?
So a lot of the times when a lot of minority voters don't have trust in mailing voting processes, and they have to wait longer in line to vote and even compared to white voters.
Thank you, Emma, for the insight. It's much appreciated. Now for a commercial break.
This is Hofstra Votes Live, coverage of the 2020 election.
To me, the most important thing about being in the human race isn't winning. It's participating, living life to the fullest, emphasis on living. This is what makes life, life. Yet how much of life are we willing to miss out on? Untreated hearing loss affects our mobility. It increases the risk of falls by 50%. Good hearing health is essential to staying engaged and doing what we love. Hear well and stay vital. Get a hearing health check every year.
Welcome back to Hofstra Votes Live, the School of Communications live election night coverage.
We're gonna bring you over once again to the live view at a Hempstead polling station.
And very interesting this year, Hempstead, one of the areas that has been known before of being suppressed for voters. Hempstead, considered one of the 5 boroughs of Long Island, the 4 other boroughs, including Baldwin, Freeport, Uniondale, and Roosevelt. So 5 areas that have been voter suppressed before, areas where you have long lines stretching around the block. I mean, you look at Baldwin, 3 voting places for a town with almost 100,000 people population, and you can't have that. And it's very hard to have that, and it's hard, and you can't have that. You can't have that in an area. You can't have that. You can't suppress voters. People want to exercise their vote, and you cannot have that in areas like that.
And even Nassau County Executive Laura Curran did ask for an extension for early voting hours last week. Now we're going to toss to our live view for more.
Thanks, Eli. So the night the nation has been waiting for is finally here, and we're just a few minutes away from this polling site closed. And we're here with New York voter Jennifer. So what was it like voting in a pandemic this year?
It was actually quite easy. It was just as easy as the last time I voted as well. This location is pretty cool with the voting. But I think it was because of everyone getting their vote in pretty early too as well. It seemed pretty even smoother and hassle-free.
Yeah, so why did you choose to come in tonight to vote rather than any of the other methods?
Well, I work a lot, so I'm like literally up at 5:30, out at 7, don't come home till I only got out early just so I could vote tonight. I'm late and just last minute, as long as I can get it in last minute, it seems the way to go for me.
Yeah, and how was this election different other than just being in a pandemic, with the candidates and everything? How is it different from past elections that you voted in?
I feel like because of the pandemic and with the presidential itself at state, just to know that everyone was on it more so, and I'm looking at it at a different standpoint this year. I could appreciate a little bit more this go around than all the other years back.
Yeah, and was there any way that you prepared to vote this season? Did you watch the debates? Did you do outside research, or did you just focus on what the media was presenting?
I'd have to say a little bit of all of the above. Yeah, definitely based on what the debates were like this year. It was pretty comical. So, yeah, I definitely tuned in with that. But just a little bit of all of the above is the reason why I'm even here.
Yeah, perfect. Sweet. And we're back to you guys in the studio.
Again to our live hit. Rachel, you look again at Long Island, you hear about polling places like this. Something that has always been a discrepancy or an issue with Long Island has been the issue of redlining. You look at places like Hempstead and Garden City. Hempstead considered one of the worst 5 school districts in the state of New York. On the other hand, Garden City consistently one of the top 5 or 10. These are huge issues, and these are communities that are literally right next door to each other. You cannot see that, and it just shows the economic, civil, and just disparities between 2 completely different towns, all because of the people who live there.
Well, Long Island is very specific, and they're still suffering with the effects of redlining over so many years. Improvements have been made, but there's still so much left to go. Even Suffolk County, it's a very red area still. There has been more of a blue wave, especially in Nassau.
And Suffolk County was a flip district, if you want to call that. And for the Obama administration in 2008 and 2012, Suffolk County voted blue. But in 2004 with Bush and in 2016 with Trump, the county went back to red. Rachel, could you see Suffolk County continuing the pattern of flipping again, or does it look like Suffolk County might remain on red?
Well, it all depends, and we're going to go to our Long Island correspondent, Sam Seibert, for more. Sam, what are you seeing?
Thanks, guys. So the biggest races on Long Island we're looking at are the congressional races in District 1 and District 2. In District 1, we have Republican incumbent Lee Zeldin going against Democrat Nancy Goroff. Lee Zeldin is running for his 4th term in office, and over the last few years, he's aligned himself closely with President Trump. And Nancy Goroff has a different angle to her campaign. She's a scientist and a professor at Stony Brook University, and she says that Zeldin and Trump have not handled the COVID-19 pandemic correctly, and if she's elected, that she will fix their mistakes. Now, in District 2, we have Republican Andrew Garbarino and Democrat Jackie Gordon going against each other to take over Republican Congressman Peter King's seat. Garbarino has been an assemblyman for the last 8 years, and he's been endorsed by Peter King, who's been the representative for this district for the last 28 years. And Gordon, on the other hand, while she hasn't been endorsed by King, has been endorsed by Biden and Obama, which is a really big step for her. So Frank, Max, Rachel, what do you guys think about these races?
Thank you, Sam, for that report. Districts 1 and 2 in Long Island are a big race for national attention. District 1 between Nancy Goroff, Democrat, and Republican Lee Zeldin. Guys, what are we thinking here with District 1?
As Sam did mention, Nancy Goroff is a real scientist. She's a professor at Stony Brook University. She's using science to combat issues like climate change and the coronavirus pandemic, an approach that is desperately needed, especially in a time where a lot of people deny climate change and deny precautions taken to prevent the spread of COVID-19.
Long Island, one of the places in the U.S. that by 2050 would be completely underwater, and even sooner due to the fact that, well, it is a literal island as well. It's projected to around the mid-2030s, even 2040, Long Island would go under. So to have somebody with science backing up in an area that is very red, Suffolk County, a rural area where rural voters tend to vote red, and also where money lies with areas like Montauk and Hempstead, where they vote red as well. So we're not going to go to our national desk to hear about polls and what's going on.
You, Max, Rachel, and Frank, for those updates in New York and on Long Island. Let's talk about all of the polls that are closing all across the country. Crystal, Eddie, what are we seeing nationally in terms of polls closing?
Well, Eli, we have New Jersey that just confirmed they have elected former Vice President Joe Biden. And it doesn't surprise me, really, Eddie, because when we look at how the mail-in ballots were working in New Jersey specifically, Democrats, those who identified as Democrats, had a higher rate in voting compared to Republicans in the state of New Jersey. What do you make of that, and as well as the other states that have closed their polls?
Well, I think that it's clearly an estimate based upon the amount of votes that are expected to be counted in New Jersey later tonight. The showing out by Republicans in New Jersey just was not strong enough to warrant a projection or a too close to call. But the one state I do want to talk about is Ohio. Democrats have sort of been flip-floppy when it comes to Ohio, and specifically Delaware County, which has not seen a Democrat leading in it since 1916, and Biden is up 55-43 in that county. That could prove very costly for Trump should he lose Ohio.
And the numbers, 55-43, what is it that is making the residents in Ohio lead towards Joe Biden?
I would have to say that there has to be some type of balance between the economy, the coronavirus response. I think that when you take a look at national polls, around March, Biden and Trump were very, very close. And then as the coronavirus pandemic hit, we saw more and more that separation, that gap, and that's where Biden sort of jumped out to that lead. We see that in Ohio. Although he kept it close today, it is still way too close to call, but it is you have to be smiling if you're in the Biden camp right now this close in Ohio.
Eli, are there any states that have gotten you by surprise with the polls closing now?
I think we really still have to take a look at Georgia. I think Georgia polls have already closed, and while Donald Trump is currently up 56-42, this is still anyone's game. Right now it's leaning more towards Trump, but it really could be anybody. And I think we still need to keep an eye on Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina as the polls close, because those states are key if Biden wants a smooth and easy road to election.
Smooth and easy would be very simply putting it. I think we knew going into tonight it would be a very uphill battle for President Trump. He needs to win Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina to be able to do this. Eli, please, where are we going next?
Right now, we're going to take it over to Amdalat Ajasa, who is our Midwest correspondent. Amdalat, what are you seeing out in the Midwest right now?
Thanks, Eli. As our team has already revealed, Illinois has been called for Joe Biden. This isn't something that's something that's surprising, considering that the past three presidential elections they have won. The Democrats have won that state. Speaking of voter suppression and printing errors, Wisconsin, in its sixth biggest district, experienced some printing errors as well. There was a scratch on the side of the ballots that caused 13,500 ballots to be redone. And it's going to be hand done by local officials because the state Supreme Court chose not to rule on the issue. So those 13,500 ballots have to be redone by the local officials. On top of that, there was a new change that happened 6 days ago in the state, 6 days before the election. The United States Supreme Court ruled that there isn't going to be an extension for absentee ballots received after the day of the election. That could cause longer lines in Wisconsin, with people having to wait in lines if their absentee ballot hasn't been received. That's a similar case for cases in Minnesota as well. Just 4 days ago, an appellate court in Minnesota ruled that absentee ballots received after the election would be put on hold. This is in stark contrast to what was ruled in April, saying that ballots could be received 7 days after the election. So that's all for your update here in Minnesota. Polls are closing rapidly as we speak, polls are closing around 8 Central Time. So we have a couple more minutes before we start looking at results. That's all for your Midwest correspondent. I'm Amdallah Adasa. Now back to the East Coast team.
Thank you so much, Amdallah. So in Ohio, with 9% of the reporting in for the state, it has been deemed too close to call. President Donald Trump holds 43% of the votes, and former Vice President Joe Biden is at 54%. I'm joined by Alex here. Alex, can you talk about what these numbers mean this far?
Well, too close to call makes perfect sense. I mean, Ohio is called a battleground state for a reason. It's only 9% of the votes being reported in. Too close to call makes perfect sense. It's been a real battle looking at the polls. Every poll has Trump and Biden going neck and neck throughout this whole way.
Now, talk about the significance of Ohio historically for a presidential election.
Well, Ohio is a huge swing state. And every election since 1964, the president who's won Ohio has gone on to win the entire election. So we could be seeing that as a huge factor in this election, whoever wins Ohio.
Now, can you talk about the Senate races in Ohio and what their significance is to the presidential election?
Well, the Senate races are mostly important for the bigger picture, in the bigger picture, for the president. You know, the Democrats. If Biden wins, he's going to need some Democratic seats in the Senate. If Trump wins, he's going to need to keep that Senate majority. So whatever we find out in the Senate will be a big factor in pushing up legislation later on.
Now, are there any polls you've seen out of Ohio that are specifically interesting?
Well, mostly interesting is in the 1st District in Ohio. Steve Chabot and Kate Schroeder have had a tight election leading up to the polls. Still no results on that yet, but we'll take a look at that in the future.
Thank you so much, Alex. Now we're going to head over to Stephen LaRussa at the Small Wall.
So when we look at a state like Ohio, we're looking at the 3 C's, those being Columbus, Cincinnati, and of course, Cleveland. These are 3 major Democratic strongholds throughout the state. So as it stands right now, we have 53% of the expected vote in, and those 18 electoral votes are still up for grabs, even though former Vice President Joe Biden leads by 11 points currently. Now we're looking at where this vote is coming in. Of course, if it is mostly in those 3 areas, this does not mean the end of the night for the president. The president is really looking to this state as part of his path to 270. And in fact, the campaign really thinks that their path to 270 runs straight through Ohio. Now, when we're looking at the state, we know that the southern part of Ohio, except for Hamilton County, which includes Cincinnati, is a strong Republican hold. In these Republican counties, the president is going to have to run up the numbers in these counties and make sure that he can overcome that 11-point deficit. So we're really going to be honing in on where those votes are coming from. And if the vice president is able to hold these leads, this would be a major, major victory for early in the night for the former vice president. Now, as we look to the path to 270, of course, if the former vice president is able to win Ohio with its 18 electoral votes, this will be a huge win on the East Coast and the Midwest for the former vice president, and will really open up a bunch of paths to 270. On the other hand, if the president is able to hold this state, we're seeing that this opens up more options for them on their path to 270, as now they would focus their attention to other counties and other states, such as Arizona, which we still haven't seen any polls close yet, and then all these states in the South that we're still waiting for, including Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. Now, as we're going through this night, we're going to be looking at these states and making sure and looking at which states are essential and which states can others of the other candidate lose and still make that path to 270. Of course, you have voters making these calculations right now at home, and you have the campaigns frantically making these calculations, seeing if they lose these states, where is their path to 270, and is it possible for them to get there with the current states that they have. Now we're going to toss to national. Back to you guys.
Thank you for that national update, Stephen, on the small wall. Now we're going to talk about something that's very interesting to voters on both sides, and that's bipartisanship. Eddie, Crystal, let's talk about bipartisanship.
I think you can't mention bipartisanship without some of the major accomplishments from Congress this year. The HEROES Act and the CARES Act, the Payment Protection Program, the PPP that allowed small businesses to be able to succeed. You have to give credit to both Democrats and Republicans that when push came to shove, they were able to give some assistance to the people. Maybe not as much as others would have liked, but they were still able to come together in a time of need and get legislation passed.
You know, Eddie, you bring up some very good points, but if we look closely, even with COVID-19, even though there were small businesses and a lot of other businesses that were aided during the pandemic, and a lot of Americans as well, one specific community, the immigrant community, had a lot of struggles facing during this pandemic across the country. Many weren't able to apply for SNAP benefits, weren't aided in unemployment, and didn't even qualify for the stimulus checks. Only about 5% of those immigrants were able to be helped during the pandemic. So what do you make of that? You know, we allow a lot of help for Americans, but what about the immigrant community?
Well, I think that in terms of the immigrant community, there has to be some form of recognition from congressional leadership that there needs to be systematic changes, whether that is stricter immigration laws, more loosened immigration laws. I think that both Democrats and Republicans can agree that what's going on right now with the way that the United States is treating immigrants is not working.
Which is interesting to say because according to research, Florida is specifically the Hispanic community have a great voter turnout in voting towards Trump, which is pretty ironic because a lot of them worry about immigration, but then again, in recent studies shows that only 16% of Latinx voters are worried about immigration.
Well, the Latinx community is not a monolith, Crystal. They are a diverse group of human beings who have different opinions, and that is the very key to bipartisanship. Eli, please.
I think we can't talk about bipartisanship without talking about the stimulus checks, without talking about the stimulus relief that Congress was supposed to be passing right now for relief for not only businesses but people during the COVID-19 pandemic. Eddie, can you sort of walk us through what the bipartisan congressional checks were supposed to be about and how that's sort of not really helping the average American person right now?
Well, it's sort of, it was, but it wasn't. When there was massive unemployment, they were able to get the stimulus checks out, but then as we're looking forward now, people are starting to lose that unemployment, rent is becoming due, and the bonuses are starting to fall flat.
Right now, we're going to take it to a PSA. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with Hofstra Votes Live coming at you more. Tune in.
Hofstra Votes Live continues after this.
There's just something about music that stirs the soul, makes us crank it, let go and come alive. This is what makes life, right? Yet what if too much of a good thing today could make us miss out on life tomorrow? 1 in 5 American teenagers now has some type of hearing loss. Loud noise is the most common cause. And these days, we're plugged in louder and longer than ever. Let's hear for life. Turn the volume down.
I'm Dr. Shelley Flace with today's tip for kids from the American Academy of Pediatrics. If you own firearms, it's your responsibility to make sure they're always stored safely. Hiding them in a closet or drawer is not enough. Kids know where they are. Research shows the risk of injury and death is lower if guns are stored unloaded and locked up, with the ammunition locked in a separate place. This is important when children are young, as well as when they grow into teenagers. For more, talk with your pediatrician or visit healthychildren.org.
We return to Hofstra Votes Live, the Lawrence Herbert School's election night coverage.
Hello and welcome back to the regional portion of Hofstra Votes Live, streaming on YouTube, Facebook, the Heat Network, and WRHU Hempstead 88.7 FM, Radio Hofstra University. I'm Frank Shields, and we're going to transition our attention to some crucial races going on in Long Island. Where are we at right now, guys, with Long Island elections?
Well, right now we're still waiting for numbers to come in. An interesting number reported from Newsday today, though, and a couple Newsday reporters. Long Island's mail-in voting alone has already doubled than what Nassau County had last election. So excuse me, but the amount of mail-in votes from Nassau County alone has already been doubled than what Nassau County voted as a whole in the 2016 election. And so a more civically engaged people now, and it's this big thing that you are seeing young people come in. You're seeing young voters vote. You're getting a large turnout from young voters, and a lot of that goes to social media, Rachel.
Exactly, and that just points to the high stakes of this election. And even before this, college-age students had the stereotype that we did not go out and vote. But I think that college-age students will break that stereotype this year with the passion, especially with the social media apps like Snapchat, Instagram. They have links to register to vote. They always pop up on your phone. I know you've been talking about that before. They really try to encourage young people to get out there and vote and to make it as convenient as possible to sign up, to register, and get everyone informed and educated on who's running.
They do, and I think more than that, they promote other ways of voting as well, such as mail-in voting, something that has really been a hot topic in the tri-state area in Pennsylvania. Specifically in Pennsylvania, if you want to look at them there, mail-in voting has been a hot topic there. Earlier this year, 9 ballots were thrown away, and you had to see what happened. And we're now going to be moving to an interview with Dr. Craig Burnett, political science professor at Hofstra. Doctor, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And it looks like we have a bit of technical difficulties right now. But one of the most divisive things we've had this year in the 2020 election.
Well, even thinking about Pennsylvania, it's a battleground state. 20 electoral college votes are at stake in this, and that even heightens the fact that every single vote counts, especially in Pennsylvania. And we have an expert on mail-in voting. We have Dr. Craig Burnett. He's a political science professor here at Hofstra, and a lot of his research has been in academic journals. Dr. Burnett, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well, thank you.
All right, so let's talk about this partisan issue. We've seen a lot of it this year where some people are distrustful of fraud. What's your message to people who don't trust the mail-in voting system?
Well, the incidence of fraud across all of voting is actually exceedingly low. There are, of course, isolated incidents that we can point to and say that people are behaving badly, but ultimately it's never been really something that we should ever equate to being on a massive scale. But it's normal for people to be uncertain of areas that they're not familiar with. So right, mail-in voting is something that's relatively new for a lot of people. Most people are generally familiar with going in on election day, casting their ballot, and then sitting home on election night and seeing who's going to win. This is different. We've got a lot of uncertainty out there. This is a really high stakes election. A lot of people have cast their ballots by mail, and it's something that they have not personally done. But I will say across several states, especially in the West, they've been doing this for a while, and the incidence of problems is exceedingly low.
And Doctor, something else to ask about mail-in voting. We've heard a lot of people this year saying that maybe it's not secure or ballots are being thrown away. Is that very true, and is that a fear that mail-in voters should be worried about going forward? Is the potential that their ballot might be lost?
No, I would not be concerned about that. The biggest concern amongst those who are following this in terms of election law and election sort of security is going to be, as you might expect, interference from the outside, people trying to hack the totals, people trying to be able to hack the machines. Let me give you an example here. Think about the most successful person you could think in terms of harvesting and corrupting ballots for a mail-in election. Now think about how difficult that is to do that. It's extremely difficult. You have to know who that person is. You have to vote. You have to be able to request that ballot, and then you need to be able to capture that ballot on the way back, and then subsequently fill out that ballot, and then sign off on that ballot, possibly with a witness, and then get it to the person that needs to count it. It's extremely difficult. Quite frankly, if you're trying to steal the election, it's not worth your effort. There are so many other softer targets you would want to tackle that this is just not something we should be worried about.
All right, Dr. Burnett, that was an incredible analysis. Let's talk about naked ballots a little bit more. What's the risk of people not filling out their ballot correctly, and does that make a big difference in the election?
It might. You always run the risk of people fouling their ballots in any certain way. It's possible, as I tell people, it's very possible during the primary I screwed up my own ballot. I actually think I did. So, somebody who's supposed to be an expert on this blow it, yeah, probably on their own ballot. Did it change the outcome of the election? No, I'm pretty sure it didn't. So, do you need to be more informed as a mail-in voter? Yes, absolutely. You have. That's sort of the burden that the voter has to share, right? And so this is something that the voter has to decide is in their best interest, right? If you want to go on election day, you know that process. It's very clear. You're able to get the ballot, fill it out, and then drop it off. If you're going to do it by mail, there is a higher burden that we place on voters to do that correctly. Is it going to change the outcome of the election? I would be very surprised if that was within the margin. But what we've seen so far is that the rejection rate, which is ultimately what I think you're referring to, has actually been fairly low.
And thank you very much once again to Dr. Craig Burnett. But Frank, it looks like we have news coming out of New York. What's the news right now?
Yes, we're just getting word now regarding a winner in the presidential race in New York. Joe Biden is the projected winner of New York during the presidential election. Guys, how are we feeling about this?
It's not a surprise again. I mean, the tri-state area is a blue stronghold for anyone running for office. You look at Connecticut, Jersey, and now New York. Joe Biden gets the win, 0.0 votes in right now. But Rachel, we shouldn't be surprised that Joe Biden's getting the win. New York has not voted red since the 1980s, again with that Reagan, and then after Reagan, the Bush administration. The tri-state area always goes blue, and New York is just a shining example of that.
Yeah, and again, it's really not a surprise. The city really is pulling this. But going back to mail-in ballots and Pennsylvania, the battleground state, we have our Pennsylvania correspondent, Lindsay Hill. Lindsay, what are you seeing tonight?
Mail-in voting in PA has been a hotly contested issue, as it has been around the nation. The main issue comes in with mail-in ballots will be received and counted as long as they've been postmarked by 8 p.m. November 3rd, which means there is a 3-day extension to count ballots. Counties in PA were not allowed to count ballots until today, meaning some opened them on 7 a.m. starting today. Some started counting at 8 p.m. once polls closed, and some counties won't even start counting their mail-in ballots until tomorrow. Another issue arises that Dr. Burnett mentioned with the secrecy ballots, meaning if you didn't place your mail-in ballot in the secrecy envelope, your ballot will not be counted in the election, which could lead to thousands of ballots being tossed out for this election. PA is a very important swing state. Currently, we have Joe Biden leading with only 9% reporting. This could change by Friday when more results start to come in. So it all comes down to Pennsylvania and their mail-in ballots. Max, Frank, and Rachel, back to you guys on the regional side.
Lindsay, you mentioned the secrecy envelope for PA and that if your ballot is not in it, you will not count your vote. How big of a factor do you think that is for the vote in PA this year? And do you think there's a chance that a lot of ballots are going to get tossed out?
Cannot be traced around the area. Mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania, as I said, there's a 3-day extension. We might not know results for PA until Friday, and we haven't had a delayed election like this since 2000 in Florida. So a lot of this election may come down to all of the mail-in ballots and extensions in various states across the country.
All right, Lindsay, thinking about how high the tensions are, especially going back to the primaries in Pennsylvania, about 50% of people did vote absentee, and that did raise a lot of emotion. And Lindsay, what can you tell us about voter intimidation at the polls tonight?
Recently, a story has come out that open carry groups in Erie, Pennsylvania are going to be carrying their guns to the polls. The authorities in Erie County have said that they're keeping the open carry people at least 100 feet away from polling sites with their guns. So it is very hard to tell what's going on with voter suppression. In North Philly, people got their polling places mixed up where they were told wrong information where their polling places are and did not find out until they showed up and were turned away. So a lot of maybe theories of voter suppression have been popping up in Pennsylvania, and there's a lot to think about this night.
Now, Lindsay, the big topic in Pennsylvania, as we've been discussing, is mail-in voting. Where do you see mail-in voting leaning towards, Democratic or Republican mostly?
I think a lot more Democrats statistically have been requesting their mail-in ballots for this election because we are more scared. There's fear of coronavirus coming up. People want to be more cautious and keep themselves and others safe. So I think mail-in vote really does lead Democratic. Statistics show that that's how it leans.
And Lindsay, that there is a lawsuit filed tonight with Montgomery County for counting ballots too early. What can you tell us about that story?
Yes, Montgomery County has had a lawsuit filed against them for pre-canvassing their ballots, which means they opened and looked through ballots before Election Day, which is against state law. They have granted a motion to stop counting these ballots. They were allowing people to come in and fix their ballots or vote correctly, which is against state law. We're not knowing right now if there are more counties in Pennsylvania that have done this, so it's a developing story as of right now.
And thank you very much once again to our Pennsylvania correspondent, Lindsay Hill. Frank, Rachel, Pennsylvania, a huge state in this election, and Joe Biden already looking like he has a little bit of a lead. And again, Pennsylvania, the winner, has a more than 80% chance to win in this election. I mean, you'd have to say this is maybe the most crucial state in this election, or if not, one of the three biggest crucial states in this election.
Max, that's a great point. It's a critical state for either candidate to win. Remember, in 2016, Donald Trump only won by a really slim margin of about 0.7%. So Joe Biden can easily take it. There is no advantage based on what the 2016 elections were.
Now, Max, Rachel, Trump is really leaning towards or taking back Pennsylvania so much as the Trump administration devised a strategy that would suppress mail-in ballot votes within Pennsylvania. The processing of the absentee ballot votes in election would limit the amount that will be counted on that day. Now, this has been a topic of controversy and concern for many constituents. How do we feel about this?
Well, this is a huge issue for Pennsylvania. This even went to the Supreme Court, where they had to ask newly appointed Justice Amy Coney Barrett not to vote on this issue because they felt that it would be unfair considering she just joined. So it's interesting to see what they do now, but we're getting word now that our correspondent, Athena Dawson, is ready to speak about New York City and New York going to Joe Biden. Athena, what do you have about for us?
Right now, Joe Biden is the projected winner of New York. That's not really...
Hello and welcome back to the national coverage of Hofstra Votes Live. I'm Eddie Fitzgerald. Let's check in with our live reporter, Jordan. Oh, excuse me, we are heading right back to regional. Max and Rachel, take it away.
And thank you very much, Eddie. And now we're going to go back to our New York City correspondent, Athena Dawson, to speak about New York City and New York going blue for Joe Biden. Athena, take it away.
Thanks, guys. So like I said before, it is really not a surprise that Joe Biden is the projected winner of New York. New York, as we know, is a blue state, and it is not going to change anytime soon. If he wins, he will get 29 electoral votes, which is a significant amount of votes for Joe Biden. Right now, he's leading in the polls with 119 electoral college votes. And he's also leading by 59.8% points with 8,075,745 votes. So like I said before, guys, I'm really expecting Biden to win, and you guys should too. Now back.
And we have breaking news that Business Insider is now reporting that the USPS failed to meet a judge's deadline to sweep facilities in order to make sure no mail-in ballots are left behind. U.S. District Judge Emmett Sullivan ordered the post office on Tuesday to send inspectors to processing locations to ensure no ballots have been held up. But the Postal Service said it in a court filing that is instead opting to follow its pre-planned inspection cycle. Frank, Rachel, this is huge news in that we might have ballots not counted or some ballots even be invalidated if that secrecy envelope is broken.
Yes, Max. In the case of naked ballots not going to the secrecy envelopes has proved controversial as well. These ballots that are not in their secrecy envelopes will not be counted at all. And the fact that there's going to be a holdup on the election results, I don't know what's going to be happening. What do you think, Rachel?
Even back to Joe Biden pulling the win Donald Trump has made claims that he will win majority in upstate New York and Long Island, and it's not true. It wasn't enough for him to pull the win. Biden did pull blue in this year's election.
But I think with mail-in ballots, it wasn't as big as a factor in New York because I think everyone knew it would go blue because New York has that strong base in New York City and the 5 other boroughs with Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx, that strong base they can build around. The issue more lies in Pennsylvania with mail-in voting. If these ballots are lost and not counted, we all of a sudden could see an election that maybe Joe Biden looks like he might win a county, Donald Trump could win a county. You can't have these situations happening, and the USPS needs that funding to make sure these issues don't happen as well. This goes back to Donald Trump removing funding from the USPS, an organization that had an over 80% approval for the U.S. economy.
And with that, we're going to throw to a commercial break.
Welcome back to the National Desk here at Hofstra Votes Live. I'm Eddie Fitzgerald. We're going to check in with Juliana now over at the Decision Desk.
Thanks, Eddie. As polls continue to close across the nation, let's check in with our analyst, Madeline Greenberg, for an update.
Thanks, Juliana. As you might have heard already, New York has pulled blue once again for Joe Biden. Though this may be an expected win, it is great for the Democratic Party nonetheless. And while the Northeast is looking pretty good for blue, the South is looking very much red for pulling for President Donald Trump. We see in Oklahoma, President Donald Trump has been called the winner for Oklahoma, as well as Louisiana, as well, with its 8 electoral votes. These are very big oil and gas states, and with talks of climate change and fracking, I'm sure that these states really wanted President Donald Trump to be elected again so that their economy can grow as well, like, especially with COVID and all different manufacturing jobs being closed as well. So we can see that the Northeast is blue as expected, but the South is remaining pretty much red as also expected. And we've seen that in polls recently too, that Oklahoma and Louisiana as well, Donald Trump has been pulling great numbers well into the double digits. That's all I have right now. Back to you.
Thank you, Madeline. We're now going to throw it back to our national anchor, Eddie Fitzgerald.
And welcome back here at the National Desk. Eddie Fitz joining. We're going to go over to Jordan Chacon, who's out at the polls. Well, a little bit of technical difficulties here, but breaking down some of what...
Thanks, Eddie. So the polls closed less than 20 minutes ago, and we haven't seen much turnout from Hempstead voters tonight. It must seem... it was reported that almost 1.1 million New Yorkers took advantage of the absentee and early voting period. So that could explain the low turnout that we had tonight here in Hempstead. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get a lot of people to interview, but people passing by mentioned how quick and easy it was to vote tonight. So I'm very happy to hear that a lot of people were really pleased with how it was to vote during a pandemic. And however, here in New York, only the unofficial results from in-person early voting and election day voting will be released tonight. Absentee ballots will be reported in the following days, depending on the county. And I think that's all we have to report for right now. And back to you guys in the studio.
Well, thank you so much, Jordan, for that amazing update. Closing in on the amount of people actually showing up. We are seeing low numbers turning out in Hempstead right now. And Crystal, Eli, I want to get your guys' opinion on this. Do you feel like it is more advantageous for these voters to be voting at home when it comes down to the coronavirus pandemic?
I think it really depends on what they're, comfortable with doing. I think mail-in voting has been a way of voting for years now, right? Even President Trump votes by mail, or has, except for this election. So I think voting by mail has always been something that people look for. I think especially, though, this year, people have looked to mail-in voting as sort of a safe haven because they're not comfortable going in with the coronavirus pandemic.
And it's definitely a great option to have, especially during the pandemic, like you mentioned, Eli, because people want to take those safety precautions and not put their lives at risk and other loved ones as well. And I think the main concern here is that the opposing views to mail-in ballots is a repeat of Bush versus Gore. People are fearful that we'll see a miscount in the votes. And again, a lot of voters have the option to either vote in person or vote through mail. And I think whatever the end results are, we can still get through it and preserve the safety of all Americans.
We have so much more coming up for you on early voting and voter turnout. But right now, we're going to go to our Midwest correspondent, Amdalat Ajasa, to give us a look at what it looks like in the Midwest right now as polls are closing. Amdalat?
Thanks, Eli. Right now, while it isn't surprising, it looks as though North Dakota and South Dakota have been called for Donald Trump. This isn't really surprising. North Dakota has voted Republican for president out of 26 out of their 32 presidential elections, and South Dakota has voted for a Republican candidate since 1968. Like I said, it isn't surprising, but I feel like the Joe Biden camp might have held on to a little bit of glimmer of hope, considering that COVID-19 cases in North Dakota and South Dakota are ravaging the state. It looks right now as though South Dakota and North Dakota are the new epicenters of the United States looking at COVID case wise, and they're every day they're breaking a COVID-19 case records. Speaking on absentee ballots and mail-in ballots, it looks as though 1.9 million absentee ballots were received in Wisconsin, and I think it's about 1.7 million in Minnesota. That's all that I have for your update right now. As you guys know, the polls have just closed here in the Midwest states, so we're still keeping an eye out, and I will let you guys know when I know.
Well, thank you so much, Amdi, for that amazing update on the Midwest. The biggest stories tonight, if you're just tuning in to Hofstra Votes Live, Eddie Fitzgerald here. Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina still too close to call. Eli, Crystal, what are you guys making of this?
Well, we're watching as results are coming in for these three obviously crucial states. We're also watching right now Pennsylvania, as our regional desk is watching. We're also right now watching Ohio, which is something you, Eddie, actually brought up earlier. Ohio is right now leaning heavily towards former Vice President Joe Biden, which is something that Ohio really hasn't done in years, which is very big for the Biden campaign. I'm sure they're smiling right now. Georgia and Florida both leaning more heavily towards President Donald Trump, with North Carolina a bit more of a tighter race in terms of numbers. What else are we seeing in terms of results and polls closing right now, Crystal?
Well, as we're looking closely at Florida here, we have Donald Trump leading 51 and former Vice President Joe Biden with 48, which to me isn't very surprising because President Donald Trump has a big support from the Cuban Americans there in Florida. They really love a lot of his policies. They look closely at how he's strengthening ties with Venezuela. And again, it doesn't surprise me that he's leading right now, but we can't make an overall final count on what will happen because, again, it could always flip.
Other states we're looking at right now with some surprising results as they're coming in. Colorado, with former Vice President Joe Biden leading 67-31 with about 14% reporting. Kansas, with Joe Biden also leading 50-47% with about 40% reporting. And Missouri, with Joe Biden leading 58-40 with 15% reporting. Eddie, what do you make of these results coming in right now?
Well, it's almost like a little bit of a break in what we know in the Electoral College map and the world of the Electoral College as the red wall. A huge amount of red states stretching all the way from around Louisiana up into Montana. And I would have to say that these numbers being too close to call, typically these would be snap calls, guys. Kansas, Missouri being this close this early into the night is kind of shocking if you're a Trump fan or you're part of the Trump campaign, because you expect these to be very, very quick calls like North Dakota, like South Dakota, like Nebraska, like Wyoming.
Well, Arizona polls just closed, but they're not expecting to have any results or calls to be made this evening, but we will keep an eye on those different polls that are closing. Wisconsin, as Amdi mentioned, Wisconsin with less than 1% of polls reporting right now. Donald Trump is actually leading 61-36 in Wisconsin, but again, only a couple of polls are reporting right now. what different ideals do we think are being reported on right now in terms of people that are coming out and voting in person? We're still missing so many mail-in ballots in these states. Talk to us a little bit about mail-in voting and how crucial that's going to be.
Well, mail-in voting is definitely crucial in this election, and one thing we should look at is Michigan alone. They experienced a lot of wildfires this year, and many had to evacuate, and some say that could be a lot of votes missing, whether they left their votes behind or they never were able to receive it. If we look at states like Colorado too, there's a big issue being on the ballot this year. We have Proposition 115 on the ballot for Colorado, where abortion will be prohibited after 22 weeks into pregnancy. So there's a lot at stake on these ballots and at these states. And it shows a lot with the mail-in ballots as well, because if not many mail-in ballots are being received, those votes are not going to be counted unless there is of course, a recount in those ballots.
Eddie, chime in here. How important is it to have how important is it to really think about what effect early voting is having on this versus how many ballots are not being counted yet because of mail-in voting?
Well, I think that's what we're seeing in Pennsylvania and Florida and in states like Colorado and Kansas. States are unsure, and these election officials are going to have to make the decision over whether or not these projections are going to go somewhere. Are Democrats staying home or Republicans staying home? That's what we need to find out.
Right now, we're going to go to Juliana with the decision desk. We'll be right back.
Live continues after this.
Points to corporate
Freedom of the press is about your right to know. It's about your right to be informed. Today, there are real threats to press freedom and your right to know about the world around us. We must protect our right to know, no matter what kind of news is important to you. Before it's too late, understand the threats. ProtectPressFreedom.org.
We return to Hofstra Votes Live, the Lawrence Herbert School's election night coverage.
Welcome back to Hofstra Votes Live, the exclusive election night coverage here at Hofstra University. Eddie Fitzgerald here with you tonight. We're going over to Juliana at the small wall. Or excuse me, Maddie Mento at the small wall. Oh, please, guys. I mean, of course, we might be having some technical difficulties right now. However, I do want to stress, if you are just joining us, Texas has not been called. Florida has not been called. Georgia, not been called. These are all very, very key paths to President Trump's victory of 270 electoral votes. Biden's campaign keeping it close in those states, but still too close to call. Now we're going to go over to the decision desk, specifically the small wall.
And welcome back to the regional side of Hofstra Votes Live. And we have news coming out of District 5. Let's go to our decision desk to tell us what's happening.
Polls continue to close across the nation. Let's check in with our analyst, Madeline Greenberg, for an update.
A state that has been unexpectedly up for grabs is the state of Texas. Yes, the Lone Star State with its 38 electoral votes might just go blue for the first time since 1976. We've seen recent polls have the two candidates neck and neck or within that 3 to 4 point margin of error, which would be great for the Biden camp. And we can see right now that Joe Biden is leaning, with the majority at the moment. Another state that has been called for the former vice president is the state of New Mexico. So we're seeing that some of these swing states are actually leaning blue. And we know that women in red states are actually pulling that Democratic poll, which is excellent for the former vice president's campaign. That's all I have right now. Back to you.
We are going to go back now to Max at the regional desk.
Thank you very much again, Eric. And a lot of interesting things are that Joe Biden is winning states that weren't really up for grabs before. I mean, you see Texas, he has the lead. And looking at a regional scale with some candidates who have that advantage, I think we have to go back to 2018. AOC was able to beat a 10-time incumbent and take her district in a huge upset. Rachel, Frank, where are we seeing that in Long Island right now, where maybe a district that originally was projected to go red is looking like it might go blue, or the reverse?
Well, a lot of this is like a puzzle. A lot of it's still unsolved. We're still waiting for more results on the night. District 5, Gregory Meeks has no opponent in 2018. He won 100% of the vote, also had no opponent with 160,000 votes. He's been in Congress for 22 years, and he's running for his 12th term. He's a huge advocate for social justice and economic equality.
And now we're going to go to Frank for a bit more information about the winning candidate.
Yes, guys, we were seeing some news regarding the results of the race in New York's 5th Congressional District. Representative Gregory Meeks of the Democratic Party is the projected winner of the district. He was also the only candidate actively seeking office in the district. The win marks his 12th term in Congress. We're going to get more information about this win from our correspondent in Long Island, Sam Sire.
Yeah, so like you guys said, Gregory Meeks won, or is the projected winner for New York's District 5. He is unopposed, which is really interesting. Like you said, this happened in the last race. No one's going against him. This year, Meeks has been a big advocate for social justice on Long Island. He has supported the Black Lives Matter movement. He's called for justice for Breonna Taylor, who was killed in her home, which is really tragic. And this district has a big minority population. It's about 50% Black, 20% Hispanic, 15% Asian. So I think, this demographic has really supported him and everything that he stood for. His district has also been heavily affected by COVID-19. His district includes Queens, like the city. And earlier this year, that whole area was a hotspot for the virus, with over 270,000 cases in New York City and almost 25,000 deaths total. There was also so many businesses that have been affected heavily by the virus. Many people have been laid off, furloughed, people have gone out of business. So I think the virus has definitely heavily affected New York. And I think, Meeks calling for social justice and him being a big advocate for the city has helped him.
Sam, District 5 covers both Long Island and Queens, covers Nassau County and the Queens area, covering from Rockaway Beach up to the middle part of Queens. And you said that there is a large minority population as well in that district. How much of a factor would you say it was that in Meeks getting re-election, albeit with no competition, but still having the support behind him?
I think this has definitely been a big help for him because he's been such an advocate for social justice. He supported the Black Lives Matter movement. He supported calling for justice for Breonna Taylor. So I think just him being an advocate in this district that has a big minority population has really helped him because he shows he supports those people and he really wants to help them advance their lives and make a change. And I think everything that he's done and just his whole platform really shows that.
All right, Sam, our Long Island correspondent, thank you so much for that analysis. Now, she did mention coronavirus and the impacts it had on Long Island, especially in terms of jobs and the economy. Now, New York notoriously had one of the best responses in the country. Max, what's your opinion on that?
I think New York had easily one of the best responses in the country. Like you said, many scientists and polls have proven this. Governor Andrew Cuomo leading the way with help from Laura Kern in Nassau County, Bill de Blasio for the 5 boroughs, and others as well, leading a strong response to bring down the COVID cases in the nation. But as Sam said, District 5, one of the hardest hit in the nation and in New York, 25,000 deaths in that district alone, covering, again, the edge of Nassau County and most of Queens, going from Rockaway Beach up to the middle part of Queens. Rachel, that has to have been a huge response, and to see a downturn like that is just a positive sign of how good the COVID response has been by the state of New York.
But let's not forget there's been a lot of hardship in New York, especially with poor communities that they didn't have enough resources or PPE to stay safe during this pandemic, and a lot of those communities are feeling the effects a bit harder than everyone else.
Yeah, they are, and District 5 is one of those districts, as Sam said, 50% of that district and more is a minority-based district in that area. So to have that support of Gregory Meeks and have somebody who reaches out to those people who participated in helping with the Black Lives Matter protests, somebody who relates to his community and is active within his community, is what you want to see in a politician. And I think that's what makes Meeks such a strong candidate and has allowed him to stay in power for 22 years in his district, making him a strong representative for New York, Queens, and be a good representative in Congress as a whole.
And you want to see leadership in a congressional candidate, especially going through so many issues like civil rights protesting and the coronavirus pandemic. For more on this, we're going to our New York City correspondent, Athena Dawson. Athena, what are you seeing in terms of these issues?
In New York City started off with having New York City started off in the pandemic with having the worst cases of coronavirus that we had seen, especially during the March and April months. Currently, New York City has over 500,000 recorded cases of COVID. However, Governor Cuomo worked to flatten the curve, whether it was daily briefings, closing restaurants, and shutting down the New York tourism industry to ensure that people that live in New York City would be safe. The New York City positivity rate right now is currently at 1,500%. Sorry, 1.5%. My bad, guys. This is a drastic change from the beginning of the pandemic when we saw COVID cases skyrocket. In addition, essential businesses had went down to 25% capacity, which really helped to flatten the curve. This has truly, unfortunately, affected small businesses, especially those owned by minorities. We have seen that African American owned businesses, for example, have a 95% unsuccessful rate of securing a PPP loan, which causes these businesses to unfortunately shut down. As we know, New York City is a transportation hub, and subway services have been suspended from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. while they disinfect stations and trains. In addition, New York City and California have two of the biggest school districts in the United States, and New York City public schools adapted to online learning, which also helped to flatten the curve. Before the pandemic, New York City's tourism was on an upwards trend for 10 consecutive years, but unfortunately, that has taken a hit. As we have approached new phases of reopening, the state started to open some open-air areas, such as museums, and over the summer, New York City pools were open. Currently, during the fall, cases have started to rise again in areas such as Brooklyn. We're going to see what's going on as it continues. But, as I said before, Governor Cuomo has worked hard to flatten the curve. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
All right. Thank you, Athena, for that report. We're actually going to get more information from Professor Dr. Julius Wool about more about the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects. Dr. Wool?
Yeah, hello. Good evening.
Good evening.
All right, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We want to talk about New York State's reopening plan, the 4 phases everyone went through, especially the city taking the longest. What do you think about the reopening plan, and what's your analysis on how well it worked in combating the pandemic?
I think that we got started a little bit late. So we got started a couple of weeks into March, and we probably could have gotten started a little bit early, because those first several weeks of March and then early into April were really, really bad for New York. You know, for New York City in particular, for Nassau County and Suffolk County, the metropolitan area, we were really hit hard. We were the highest, COVID infection rate and mortality rate in the entire country for several weeks in March and April. But I think once we started to move, once the governor started to move and begin that phase in of closing out the state, I think we made pretty tremendous progress over the course of the late spring, the summer, and even in the early fall. I think, again, we have to be concerned now that we're beginning to see another slight increase in the infection rates and in the hospitalizations. So, again, we're definitely not out of the woods, although we have made tremendous progress, beginning in the spring and through the summer into the early fall.
Now, Professor Wool, as you know, New York is a part of the tri-state area with New Jersey and Connecticut, and they have recently established new travel advisory policies. Does New York's recent changes in its incoming travelers policy leave the state at risk for a resurgence of the virus?
Yeah, I think this season in particular is a high-risk season for several reasons. I mean, certainly travel is one reason. You know, we're beginning to get into the holiday season. So in the holiday season, people are going to begin to travel, and when they travel, they're going to be crossing state lines. And again, there are a good number of states around the country are currently at their highest point ever in terms of COVID infections. So the fact that we're really just entering into the peak travel season, between Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday, the New Year's, yeah, that in itself, as people travel across other states, particularly those states around the country that have very high positivity rates, that is going to represent the risk because those people are going to be coming into New York. And regardless of the policies, it is going to be very hard to police that travel across the borders into New York. The other thing is in the winter in general, the late fall and the early winter, people are going to be moving indoors for indoor activities. So indoor activities are obviously much more high risk in terms of transmission of the infection. And you will have, families and friends gathering during the season. So there is a tremendous risk factor in the next, several months that we could potentially be seeing a significant upswing in our infection rate. It's definitely a risk, and we have to be very careful to do whatever we can to avoid that.
And Professor, you talk about a potential increase. We see that increase in Europe right now across their major countries. Could we be looking at an increase as well in New York, or are the precautions in place to prevent a secondary wave?
No, I think we have pretty strong precautions in place. Again, even recently when we started to see pockets of increased infection rates in Brooklyn and Queens and in some areas in Westchester County, the governor put in some restrictions in terms of gatherings and business and schools in those areas where the infection rate went up. So I think we're taking the appropriate actions at the government level. But again, given the fact that people are going to be gathering indoors during the holiday season, they're going to be spending time indoors, and again, with family and friends during the holidays, it's going to be natural. I think we're also going to have to be concerned about what I would consider COVID fatigue. We've now gone through this for 8 months, going on 9 months. Especially now during the holiday season, people are going to want to gather again in groups with families, with friends to celebrate the holidays, and that is certainly going to represent a risk. For all of us in New York, and especially if it involves travel for people traveling to those states around the country where the COVID infection rates are literally at their peak right now. So we are entering into a risky period, and everybody has to be extremely concerned. Everybody has to practice, all of the common sense public health measures, and be extraordinarily careful because we are certainly not out of the woods by a long shot.
All right, Professor, let's talk about more international issues and the response in other countries. A lot of other areas are instituting month-long lockdowns again. For example, Germany and France are locking back down because of spikes in COVID. Can we expect something like that here, especially in New York?
Yeah, our approach to COVID has been very different than other countries. So we have taken, and again, this is under the leadership of President Trump and his administration, we have really taken a state-by-state approach. We've not had a strong federal response where there's been federal regulation or federal requirements with respect to public health measures, including lockdown. So I don't expect on the national level there to be a strong federal response over the next several months. Certainly within New York State, the governor has shown that if that infection rate goes above, right now the threshold is usually between 3.5% to 5%. If a positivity rate goes, north of that 3.5% to 5%, the governor has demonstrated that he will impose restrictions and various levels of lockdowns depending on the level of the infection rate at any given time. So yes, certainly in New York State, we could be in for that if the infection rate would rise into that 3.5% to 5% range. I don't see any kind of across-the-board federal type of regulations because that is just not the approach that we have had under the Trump administration in the United States, which is very different than the approaches that the other, major Western European countries that you've talked about have. They've taken a much more national approach to regulations. We haven't taken that approach under the current administration.
Now, Professor Wool, the nation has witnessed countless examples of Donald Trump's feud against Dr. Anthony Fauci and what he has to say. Donald Trump continuously downplaying him. What do you think about Trump wanting to fire Dr. Anthony Fauci?
It would be a major significant loss to the United States. I mean, he is the leading infectious disease specialist in the country, in the CDC. And I think what we've seen, unfortunately, over the last, 6 to 8 months has really been a very significant politicization of the CDC. Historically, the CDC has been a totally scientific, bipartisan organization, right? Neither party has tried to influence the scientific communication of the CDC. The CDC has communicated best scientific, best public health practice to the American people for decades in Democratic administrations and Republican administrations. Unfortunately, in this administration, we've seen really for the first time in history that the administration has attempted to influence the CDC, and in particular, Dr. Fauci. So that would be a tremendous loss for the United States in terms of our ability to come up with a national strategy to combat this infection. He plays a very, very important role. He's been in that position for many, many decades through Republican administrations and Democratic administrations, and he is one of the leading, thinkers and scientists in the world on the management of infectious disease. So if we were to lose him in his current position, that would be a tremendous loss. I think we've already seen, unfortunately, just a tremendous politicization of that agency, which had been historically a bipartisan scientific agency that's really provided the population of the United States with excellent public health information. And unfortunately, that organization has been extremely politicized over the last several months, and the current dispute with Dr. Fauci is just another example of that politicization of what should be a scientific public health bipartisan organization.
And once again, that's Professor Julius Wool. Thank you very, very much again, Professor. And we have breaking news coming out of New Jersey. New Jersey has voted yes on question 1 and will legalize the cultivation, processing, and sale of marijuana. This will come with a 2% local tax and a 6.25 sales percent tax. And we're now going to go to our mix site with Danny DiCrescenzo. Danny, are we surprised or not surprised to see New Jersey pass the legalization of marijuana?
We are absolutely not surprised. A Monmouth University poll earlier this year found 61% support for the legalization of marijuana. And this comes with a lot of consequences. Because of COVID-19, New Jersey faces a $1 billion financial revenue hole. This can be a potential $1 million stopgap in that loss of revenue. Just like how sports gambling was a big win for New Jersey, marijuana could be that next step to bring in more tax money into the state. And additionally, with the reduction of low-level drug offense arrests, this can help minorities and people of color who are arrested up to 4 to 6 times more than their white counterparts for low-level drug offenses. It's a big help on policing, it's a big help on taxes, and even a big help on jobs. This will create jobs in New Jersey. It has a lot of pluses and not a lot of downsides, so this is no surprise that it passed. Back to you guys, Max.
And Danny, also coming out of New Jersey now with their COVID response compared to the rest of the nation and with the tri-state area, how effective do you think that was, and how much do you think that's helping legislation like this getting passed and seeing that there's a government working with their people and a government ready to get things done to help out their people as well?
A whirlwind that on March 15th, the tri-state held a press conference and decided to enact strict regulations on movement of people in the tri-state area. That was huge. With the lack of federal direction at the time, the tri-state took the initiative and made the call to start imposing restrictions. And that was huge. That laid the groundwork for the great way they've flattened the curve that we see today. Now, even though we are seeing upticks as of right now, this puts the states in great positions to manage this slight uptick of COVID. And it just comes down to, are the people fatigued of COVID? Are the people tired of listening to restrictions? We'll have to see. But the culture change of the tri-state has made that seem a little bit unlikely. Max?
And thank you very much again, Dan. Frank, Rachel, marijuana legalization now passed in New Jersey, and it's been the one thing that breaks apart the tri-state area. Connecticut has nothing legalized, neither medical nor recreational. New York, it's just medical in some areas, and now New Jersey completely legal. Could we see New York or Connecticut follow suit now and legalize marijuana, even if it's just for medical usage?
Well, this decision could definitely impact Connecticut and New York. Of course, legalizing marijuana has incredible benefits for the revenue of the state. New Jersey is imposing a 6.625 sales tax on medical marijuana and recreational medical marijuana, and a 2% tax for locals.
Definitely, Max and Rachel. The state tax of 6.625% to recreational marijuana, it could bring New Jersey State $1 billion within its first year of legalization. And I think it's a great move for New Jersey. They're going to benefit from it most. It's just a while until New York and Connecticut follow behind. Will they or won't they?
Yeah, that's the big question now. Will they or won't they? We've seen the benefits of marijuana on economies across the U.S., and it's now to see if the tri-state area will follow suit after New Jersey, the first one to legalize marijuana completely recreationally, not just medical, or no legalization at all. Well, we're going to go to a PSA, and Hofstra Votes Live will be right back after the break.
We will have more election coverage coming up next on Hofstra Votes Live.
There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. She gave them some broth without any bread and kissed them all soundly and put them to bed. Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org.
And we are back with more election night coverage on Hofstra Votes Live.
Welcome back to the national coverage of the 2020 election by Hofstra Votes Live, streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and WRHU Hempstead. I'm Crystal Bermudez. Eddie and Eli, can we get a quick check-in? We've been talking a lot about the road to 270, and now we should look closely at Texas. What do you guys make of the overall results that we're seeing right now?
Well, many Democrats have suspected that Texas could potentially go blue in 2020. It is still too close to call. We're within the margin of error for polling data, Eli, and Texas is still up for grabs this early in the night. Very shocking, but very surprising for Democrats.
Texas could definitely be on the table. And to talk a little bit more about Texas, we're going to go to Juliana right now at the decision desk for an interview. Juliana?
Thank you, Eli. Yes, with 46% of the reporting in for Texas, we see President Trump up by exactly 1%. I'm here with Zevin Schuster to talk a little bit about Texas. Zevin, what do these numbers mean?
Well, these numbers are pretty fascinating. Obviously, Texas has been red for a very long time. This race is going to go late into the night. And the fact that Texas is now a battleground state really throws the election up for grabs.
Now, why is it that Texas has become such a battleground state in this election?
Well, yeah, well, I mean, you have so many minorities moving from California into a place like Texas. They have Latinos are expected to outnumber whites by the 2022. Half of kids under 18 are actually Latinos, so you have a huge shifting demographic in Texas that's actually contributing to the new electorate.
So now, can you talk about the Senate race a little bit? How close is it in relative to the presidential election?
So John Cornyn, who's the Republican senator, is actually outpolling President Trump by a lot. He's actually he's winning by 8 points presently. So that Senate race is not as close as Ted Cruz was 2 years ago against Beto O'Rourke. So right now, the main focus is on Trump and on Biden, and that's going to go late into the night. It's going to be fascinating. Texas is now a swing state.
Absolutely. Can you talk about the history, Texas, the voting history that is present in Texas?
Well, I mean, Texas has been Republican for a long time. They haven't voted for a Democrat for president in decades. So the fact that Biden actually has a puncher's chance, I would still give Trump maybe a 3 to 4 point edge. But the fact that Biden is actually competing in Texas is a really huge win for Democrats, even if they don't win. I mean, keep in mind, if Biden wins Texas, then it's over. So Trump needs to win Texas a lot more than the former vice president.
Are there any polls you've been tracking that have been worth noting?
So far, in terms of like real clear politics, it's been pretty much around a dead heat. I would still expect Joe Biden. I would still expect Donald Trump rather to win by a few points. Again, he's just based on Texas's history. I'm still going to be a little bit nervous to pull the trigger and say that a Democrat is going to win.
So, what has the voting been like in Texas? How are voters voting there?
How are voters voting, like in terms of like demographically?
The actual method of voting.
So it's actually, Texas is very much like nationally. You have a lot of Democrats voting by mail, voting early. You have a lot of Republicans showing up in person, being a lot more willing to show up into the polls on election day. And so I think Texas may be a state where you might see a late, basically like a red mirage on election day, and then a blue wave sort of afterwards as the mail-in votes sort of get counted towards the end.
Thank you so much, Zevin. Now we're going to take it back to our national anchor, Eddie Fitzgerald.
Thank you so much for that interesting information on Texas, Zevin and Juliana. We're going to head over to Katarina, who's in the newsroom with Paige Strout.
All right, thank you guys. Joining me now is Paige Strout, student expert on the coronavirus pandemic. Paige, thank you so much for being here today. So, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut have all had similar travel bans in the past, and they opened together. Why is that?
So, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, all part of the tri-state area, were one of the main areas that was hit the hardest, especially earlier this year. So, in terms of guidelines and restrictions, they all placed similar guidelines and restrictions that were stricter than a lot of the rest of the country.
Now, New Jersey is having to shut down again, but New York's numbers are actually doing better. So, they remain steadier than the rest of the country. What does this mean in terms of the pandemic moving forward?
Yes, so I think because of how hard New York specifically was hit, Governor Andrew Cuomo put in a lot of strict guidelines and restrictions, and now at least New York City's positive percentage rate is at 1.5%, Long Island's is at 1.4%, and Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey, he stated that New Jersey's going into a second wave, and their current positivity rate is at 5.29%, unlike from the end of May towards the end of September, to where they were under 5% in total. So clearly there's a big difference there.
All right, Paige Strout, thank you so much for joining us. Now we're going to head back to Crystal.
Thank you, Katarina and Paige, for that update. We're now going to take it on a conversation about the recent polls that we're seeing here, guys. Eddie and Eli, we have Biden currently winning Colorado. We have other states that still have not submitted a vote. We have in Missouri, Donald Trump winning that state so far by 52 to 46. Are there any key states that you guys are specifically looking at and are surprised by the numbers so far?
Well, I am still shocked by Ohio. Again, a Democrat in Delaware County, Ohio, that has not won. A Democrat has not won that county since 1916, and Biden is currently up 49.5 to 49.2 in that specific county. If this is a similar situation to what we saw with what we were talking about earlier with Florida, and if Trump loses Florida, if Trump loses Ohio here, he's in the same vein again where he's got to pull out all the stops to make this one work and get to 270.
When you really crunch the numbers, what you have to look at here is you have to sort of do some forecasting, right? So if we're looking at Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and then obviously, of course, we want Georgia and Florida to be in there. But if for whatever reason, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, all three go to President Trump, Biden still has a chance if he can pull Pennsylvania and either Ohio, Michigan, or Wisconsin. It's those three, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, that Trump won in 2016 that Hillary Clinton was really banking on winning, especially Michigan and Wisconsin. She really thought she had those in the bag, didn't visit those frequently, and then lost them in 2016. And I think what Biden is hoping for is to pull Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, and hopefully Ohio, which, as you said, would be remarkable.
You know, we are expecting late numbers, probably somewhere between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. coming out of Wisconsin. Lots of low turnout, depending upon when these votes were coming in, when people opened up the ballots. The early estimates right now, from what I'm seeing out of Wisconsin, is there are many, many counties that are the suburban area who need to come out, and Biden needs to show that he can win in the suburbs of Wisconsin and Michigan, unlike Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Wisconsin right now is entirely too close to call, with about 23% reporting. We're looking at 49.6% going to Joseph Biden and about 48.7% going to Donald Trump right now. Crystal, final thoughts?
Well, guys, those were some excellent points, but we are going to now take it to Amdalat, who is going to give us more insight in the Midwest.
Thanks, Crystal. We are still gathering information on the Midwest while we're here. Minnesota right now only has about 15% of its ballots processed. And of that 15%, it looks like 64.6 are going in favor of Joe Biden. That is less of a tight race than we expected. But going back to what Eli was just saying about Wisconsin, it is a very, very tight race, and it's very too close to call. Only about 37% of the ballots have been processed at this time. And of the 37 ballots, it looks like 51% are going to Joe Biden. I'm curious to see how the demographics are voting. Speaking from someone that's from Minnesota, and speaking on the Black Lives Matter movement, as you guys were talking about earlier, the world watched as George Floyd was killed by Minneapolis Police Department. But the feeling in the streets was undescribable. Youth, Black people, allies were all very energized for change. And those protests went on throughout the summer. Protests demanding justice for George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, and even Jacob Blake. Speaking of Jacob Blake, I'm interested to see how Kenosha votes as well. Kenosha was where Jacob Blake was killed or was shot 7 times in the back by police. He was not killed, but he was paralyzed, and that caused a lot of widespread protests in that state as well. Like I said, those protests in Minnesota and Wisconsin have been continuous since George Floyd's death in May. So I'm really excited to see those races. As you guys have talked about, it is too close to call right now. We don't have a lot of data in, and I will keep you guys updated as we are updated here in Minnesota. Back to you guys on the East Coast.
Thank you so much, Amdalat, for that update in the Midwest. Right now, we need to take a look at something that's actually very important when it comes to how the candidates are speaking to their voter base. And I think that's social media. And I think we really need to talk about the advantages and disadvantages that it's providing both of the candidates.
Well, I think that you certainly can see the disadvantages and advantages of social media. Particularly, one topic that I want to talk about with social media is this notion that tweets have to go viral if you are a presidential candidate, if you're a congressional candidate, that you need to have that virality. You need to be able to go out and put out witch hunt or I believe in science out on Twitter and get the masses talking, because that's what gets the share factor. And so do you feel that, Eli or Crystal at this point, do you feel that there is an overall sense of urgency to go viral instead of talking about the issues when it comes to social media?
I think what they're both trying to do is pull in this youth vote, right? They're trying to sort of pull people in based on what they think is getting through to them. And I think right now what they're hoping is that by using something like Twitter, they're getting through to younger voters faster and on a more urgent basis. I think you have to talk about the advantages, though, of being able to talk to your voters so quickly, right? President Trump, especially during his 2016 campaign, he sort of made a name for himself by using Twitter. No president has used social media the way that our president has used social media, and it has been to his advantage. Some of his advisors don't think so. They've come out and advised him against using social media as frequently as he does, but he has used it to his advantage, especially when it comes to younger voters, and I think that's what former Vice President Biden is trying to do as well.
Crystal, what's your take on this?
Well, you guys bring up amazing points here, but one thing we should keep in mind is that being able to access so much information at the palm of our hands could be very, it has its advantages and its disadvantage. Again, it's no wonder why that big social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter have taken the extra measures of fact-checking these tweets and other posts as well. But then again, we have other politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has used her platform to motivate the youth to go out and vote. She uses platforms like Twitch, Instagram Live, and other things like that, and has really done a great job in communicating to the youth. And so, again, we see that social media is a big impact in our day and age, and it really does reflect and impact how we see the election today.
Well, we are at the top of the hour here. It is 10 p.m. on the East Coast. You are listening to Hofstra Votes Live, simulcast on the Heat Network and WRHU, Radio Hofstra University, WRHU Hempstead. Right now, we're going to take a deeper look at how social media has impacted this year's election with a package on social media and the candidates.
President Donald Trump's use of social media has attracted worldwide attention throughout his term in office. Much of the tweets consist of personal vendettas towards some of his most prominent rivals, including presidential opponent Joe Biden. In a tweet released on October 8th, the president tweeted, "Joe Biden has no plan for coronavirus. All talk. He was a disaster in his handling of H1N1 swine flu. He did not have a clue, with his own chief of staff saying so. If he were in charge, perhaps 2.2 million people would have died from this much more lethal disease." On the other side of the aisle, Biden tweets against the president frequently. A few days earlier, the former vice president called for the president to take the pandemic in a more serious manner, stating, "Now that President Trump is busy tweeting campaign messages, I would ask him to do this. Listen to the scientists, support masks, and support mask mandates nationwide." However, Vice President Biden does not shy away from making brash comments of his own aimed at the president. During his 60 Minutes interview, he referenced the president's view on the 9/11 attacks.
Donald Trump says you have dementia and it's getting worse.
Hey, the same guy who thought that the 9/11 attack was a 7/11 attack.
Within the last few presidential elections, social media has been on the forefront for all candidates as a way to get messages across to their supporters.
I think that they can't ignore social media. They can't ignore, for example, not only the posts and the reposts and the retweets on social media, they can't ignore the advertising, and they haven't ignored the advertising environment in social media.
President Trump does more than simply use attack language in his tweets. For instance, he uses the platform to push his agenda on multiple issues, such as taxes, where he says, "Remember, Biden is going to raise your taxes at a level never seen before. This will not only be very costly to you, it will destroy our economy, which is coming back very rapidly." Both candidates have been using social media to gain the support of the American people when they hit the polls on November 3rd.
And welcome back to our viewers. We're going to toss it over to the decision desk.
Crystal in the national desk. So I am here to discuss a little bit of the District 9 Senate race here on Long Island. Yvette Clarke, the incumbent Democrat, took home a big win by a big margin against Constantine Jean-Pierre, Republican, in Flatbush to Sheepshead Bay. What does this mean for that election?
Yeah, extremely not surprising. Yvette Clarke won last year in 2018 in the primaries, extremely big. She won again with 85% of the vote. Heavy Democrat county, not surprising at all.
This is a big blue wave in the 5 boroughs as we head to District 12, where Carolyn Maloney, an incumbent Democrat, also took a big win against Carlos Santiago Cano.
Yeah, Carlos Santiago Cano was the Republican candidate. He is a businessman, thought he could appeal to the Spanish community, which is over 50% in that county. But Carolyn Maloney, 26th year in Congress coming up, again, not surprising for her.
You mentioned her 26th year, and we've seen, before we head to District 15, we've seen now 2 out of the 3 key elections that we're talking about in the 5 boroughs go Democrat. Could that be a little bit of a sign for the rest of the districts?
Absolutely. In District 15, you touch upon Jose Serrano was the incumbent, and he retired. It was leaving the seat open for a Republican grab, but it ended up going Democrat heavy with a 90% margin. So it's looking like that whole region of the 5 boroughs and more is going Democrat.
And as we've seen in District 15, as I just touched on, Richie Torres, a Democrat, also incumbent, taking a big win. What does that mean for the 15th district?
Yes, again, that's a huge win for him, again, because that was going to be a vacant seat, and that could have been a really huge win for the Republicans if they would have gotten that seat, but it stayed Democrat, and that is going with the theme of the 5 boroughs.
As we look, as you mentioned on the 5 boroughs, as we strand out to Long Island a little bit, we've seen a couple numbers come in, but nothing official yet. Could this be a big blue wave here between the 5 boroughs and the rest of the island?
For the 5 boroughs, definitely. We still need to wait on Richmond County and Staten Island and see what's going on with that race between Max Rose and Nicole Malliotakis. But we definitely need to look out for Nassau County and Suffolk County in Districts 1 and 2. We don't know what that's going to be. Lee Zeldin and Nancy Goroff having a really tough race. In District 2 also with Peter Cake's vacancy could be leading either way.
You mentioned Richmond County. Richmond County over in Staten Island is one of the bigger bigger districts that you need to keep on is Staten Island is a swing borough here in the 5 boroughs. What could this mean for Richmond County?
Yeah, you know, Max Rose ran a really solid campaign in 2018, and he is leaning more conservative this round as a Democrat. But Nicole Malliotakis ran a really solid campaign. It's going to be up for grabs. It's really close.
Madeline, we're going to head to you at the small wall.
Thanks, Eric. As of right now, former Vice President Joe Biden is leading the Electoral College with 131 electoral votes, and the president trailing behind with 98. The former vice president has seen an uptick in these numbers, with Washington, D.C., and him winning 95% of the vote there, and Colorado being a very environmentally conscious state, and Joe Biden running on a climate change fixable platform. And if you remember, John Hickenlooper, who also ran for president this past year, has just been announced the projected winner for the U.S. Senate. He also ran on a very environmentally conscious platform. The next state that I'm going to be looking at is North Carolina, especially. We see with electoral votes, President Donald Trump is the expected winner for North Carolina, with 87% of the expected vote coming in. So the numbers are still very close, and it's too close to call. But as we can see right now, former Vice President Biden is doing very well at the moment. Let's go back to the national team.
Thanks, Decision Desk, for that update. Eli and Eddie, we have a lot to talk about tonight, but one thing specifically I want to discuss is youth voter turnout. What is igniting for this generation to go out and vote tonight?
Well, we've seen before that there has been a massive youth turnout in this election. We saw it again in 2018, and then we're seeing it now. I think what has most energized these voters has been the coronavirus response, and then key issues like climate change and civil rights. We saw all throughout the summer the amount of protests with the new civil rights movement and how it affected young voters. And specifically, when we're looking at the numbers, according to the exit polls, most people who did not vote in 2016 or voted third party in 2016 have now switched over to the Biden campaign.
And I think a lot of those votes, as you mentioned, are the youth votes. I think especially back in 2016, you had a huge push for presidential nominee Bernie Sanders, who did not win the Democratic nomination in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. I think you got a lot of youth that supported Sanders that did not want to vote for Clinton, so they didn't show up. And I think this year, what the exit polls are telling us is that people that didn't show up for Hillary are showing up for Biden.
And now we're going to toss it back over to WRHU for more coverage.
Hello and welcome back to Hofstra Votes Live's regional coverage of the 2020 election. I'm Frank Shields and I'm one of your regional anchors tonight, along with Rachel Lucier and Max Sacco. This is Hofstra Votes Live coverage of the 2020 election from the Lawrence Herbert School of Communication. We're streaming on YouTube, Facebook, The Heat Network, and 88.7 FM WRHU Hempstead Radio Hofstra University. We're keeping an eye on any results around New York and the Northeast, while also discussing the issues impacting this election. Well, here's the latest from District 9.
And District 9, 81% reporting in, but it has been declared Yvette Clarke gets the win. The Democrat take District 9, the southern part of Brooklyn in the Kings County area. Rachel, this isn't a surprise. The southern part of Brooklyn, in that area specifically, a very large black and Hispanic population. Yvette Clarke, black herself. So she, again, appeals to her voters, and she gets the vote she needs and takes it again, beating out Constantine Jean-Pierre, 84.3% of the vote to 14.7%. I don't think we're surprised at this result tonight.
It's really not a surprise. As you said, Clarke did serve since 2012, and she carried that momentum into 2020.
And we do have some breaking news coming out of Staten Island, District 11. Right now, Nicole Malliotakis is beating incumbent Max Rose, 58.4% of the vote to 41.6% of the vote. Again, Malliotakis beating incumbent Max Rose for District 11, which is primarily Staten Island and a little bit of the Brooklyn area. Rachel, your take on this?
This is absolutely huge. Staten Island, the only swing borough in New York City. In 2016, they did vote for President Donald Trump, and in 2018, Max Rose took 53% of the vote, part of the blue wave, one of the 40 seats that the Democrats took over during the 2018 midterms. This is absolutely huge. The debates between both candidates were incredibly intense. Now, for more on this breaking news, we're going to our New York City correspondent, Athena Dawson.
News in the New York congressional races.
4 New York Congresswomen have kept their seats as Yvette Clarke won District 9 with 84% of the vote. Nydia Velasquez won District 7 with 85% of the vote. In District 12, Carolyn Maloney kept her seat, winning 82% of the vote, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won District 14 with 69% of the vote. I really want to focus on Yvette Clarke's district right now, as Yvette Clarke has been in office since 2013, and some of her policies really include affordable housing and gun violence. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Yvette Clarke made sure to advocate for free COVID testing for Brooklyn NYCHA residents. In addition, her district does encompass Brooklyn and the Flatbush area, which is 52% black. So, as you guys had said before, it's not surprising that she kept her seat. Now, back to you guys.
And Athena, just before you... And now we're going to be joined by Dr. Lightfoot. Doctor, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And
Dr. Lightfoot,
is there a delay with us?
Dr. Lightfoot will be joining us in a little bit right now. But back to these elections, Rachel, we're getting results pouring in. Frank, you too, pouring in. Nydia Velasquez takes District 7, Hakeem Jeffries, District 8, Yvette Clarke, District 9, Carolyn Maloney, District 12, Adriano Esplat, District 13. But the big one, District 15, Richie Torres versus Patrick Delicias. Richie Torres takes the win in District 15. So are we surprised there with the Richie Torres victory?
It's really not. It's the most Democratic district nationally, and coming on we have Professor Dr. Lightfoot. You're a specialist in civil rights. What can you say about recent civil rights protests affecting voter turnout?
Well, I think it has a great impact on it. I think the young people have been energized. A lot of people have been outraged at what they've witnessed on television, particularly the George Floyd murder that we saw, live, and that was just traumatic, for people who viewed it. And I think it has energized a lot of people, young and old, to, sustain protest and to continue the momentum of, making sure not only are we outraged at what's happening, but we turn that outrage into some kind of action, such as voting.
Dr. Lightfoot, President Trump has claimed that he has done the most for the African American community since Abraham Lincoln. How factual or unfactual is this statement?
It is 100% non-factual. He's a liar. The liar and thief, I call him.
All right, Professor Lightfoot. One thing I want to focus on is school districts in Long Island. What can be done to mitigate the de facto state of segregation that exists in Long Island school districts?
That is the million-dollar question. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I don't know of any square foot mile area in the country similar to the size of Long Island between the two counties, Nassau and Suffolk County, that has as many school districts as Long Island has. You have like 124 school districts across two counties, right next door to the largest school district in the nation, New York City, with over 1 million students. And we have these 124 school districts on Long Island between these two counties, ranging from anywhere between less than 5,000 to probably more than 50,000, probably at the top end. And I think these school districts, of course, follow housing patterns, which would be a difficult nut to crack if you're going to try to, change that pattern of having the housing properties fund the school districts and those who live within those cities, towns, villages, and what have you, and their taxes being supportive of their, right to attend those schools within that area. So it's a challenge. If you want to, I would say, diversify the school districts, racially.
And Dr. Lightfoot, how is Donald Trump's rhetoric of law and order in regards to civil rights, how does that sit with voters?
Well, it depends on what voters you're talking about. So I mean, he has his base, and his base is, pretty much going to go along with him, and his enablers, I should say, too, go along with him. But, I think it's offensive. His rhetoric is as offensive as it can be, insulting, disrespectful, and I don't think he, really understands. Oh, he may understand, but I don't think he really cares that he's being offensive and that he's, trying to be a president of all the people as opposed to just being the president of his base or people who support and like him.
All right, Doctor, thank you so much. And for more on these issues, we're tossing it to our New York City correspondent, Athena Dawson. Athena, what's your take on this?
Well, race and equality are very prevalent topics here in the United States. People have been protesting for months against racial injustice. We've seen, especially in New York, since the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, that there has been heightened amount of protests for racial injustice. The U.S. Crisis Project reported that 93% of racial justice protests are peaceful. The Daily News had reported that just yesterday, Black Lives Matter New York leader Hawk Newsome was arrested by NYPD after protesters blocked a pro-Trump caravan. In terms of Governor Cuomo has passed a police reform package that would require 500 municipalities to enact police reform or lose funding. New York City was declared an anarchist state by President Trump and the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice had said, quote, New York City is one of three places that have permitted violence and destruction of property to persist and have refused to undertake reasonable measures to counteract criminal activities, leading to a designation of an anarchist jurisdiction. So, racial injustice protests have still been ongoing in New York, and we do not know when these protests will end, especially with the upcoming election season. We'll only have to see as things move forward in the United States. Thank you, and back to you guys.
All right. Thank you, Athena, for that report. Now, guys, the topic of civil rights is an important discussion to be made. In the nation, these past few months, during the pandemic, we have seen racial injustice all throughout, from the tragic death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and just recently in Pennsylvania, Walter Wallace, and Trump being very critical of protesters vying for change. How do we think that this will sway voters in their decision this election?
Well, not only is it swaying voters, Frank, it's swaying what's going on the ballot, specifically in Pennsylvania and places like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Things are going on the ballot such as anti-use of unconstitutional stop and frisk, other things like there needs to be an independent civilian review of the police every year. They are looking into this. They are looking into getting things on the ballot to prevent any more deaths that are cruel, any more deaths to kill innocent men for no reason. They are getting things on the ballot to prevent these and make a better future going forward.
And police reform is a major theme of this year. It's the outcome of so many unjust deaths of black men at the hands of police. And we've seen a lot of reforms, especially in New York. Governor Cuomo has taken the initiative to change law enforcement and to put tighter restrictions on our law enforcement to keep them in order. And there's been many elected officials trying to find a common ground between law enforcement officials and Black Lives Matter protesters to find a solution to better ourselves as a society, to have a more functional law enforcement system, especially with the NYPD.
I think what's been most interesting, though, is not only on the ballot, but you look at it, too. You look at how the protests have differed just between New York City and the 5 boroughs versus Long Island. The two differences there, New York City seeing a bit more violent rioting and looting versus Long Island, where it was more peaceful protests through neighborhoods and streets. So it's very interesting to see this huge difference here. And Rachel, you might have seen this, too. Were you happen to see any or be by any during any of these protests?
I'm from Queens. I'm kind of in the middle of the city and Long Island. I've seen a lot of protests in Manhattan, and I've seen news coverage of how passionate people are, especially in the counter protests. We have a Skype interview with Linda R. Williams. Linda, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So much experience. How are the many law enforcement agencies in New York different in their individual approaches to police reform?
It's a collective effort by law enforcement across the country that every law enforcement officer are there to do their job to protect and serve. But of course, we're calling for reform for more accountability as we do our jobs.
Linda, you are also the president of NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement, and you were part of the Secret Service as well. How has that influenced some of your policies, or even being the head of NOBLE as well?
It gives me an overarching view from municipalities as well as the federal sector. Law enforcement is just that, regardless what level, if it's the local, state, or federal level, that it still is held to the same standards of professionalism, and of course to the accountability. And that's what we have to do in the communities that we serve, that we have to be accountable. But it starts with us developing trust and make it a reciprocity that the communities that we serve trust us, but we can trust them to have our back as well as we do our jobs.
Now, Ms. Williams, nationally there has been a debate over whether or not law enforcement agencies should be abolished or defunded. What do you believe the appropriate course of action for American police departments should be?
I think it should be a holistic approach. One of my agendas as the incoming president was a task force entitled Reimagining Public Safety. And that's looking at assessing it, addressing it, and correcting those actions. So we as law enforcement, when you say defunding, we have a different definition of that. Not to take away or to shut down law enforcement, but reallocate or even appropriate additional funding to the social services that we need as law enforcement officers to respond to specific calls.
And let's talk about police brutality. There are statistics that show that law enforcement officials go after people of Black people and minorities. What's the solution to better our law enforcement system to bring more equality and justice in our criminal system?
We have to teach diversity and illicit biases, because people come with their own, prejudices and the way that they think. But it has to start at the top of an organization. That hierarchy has to make sure that that is not a tolerated practice throughout their organization. And when that structure is permeated throughout the organization, that you will be accountable and there will be consequences when you don't do that. And particularly when you withhold a person's constitutional right. And of course, that gives us the right to be able to protest peacefully and make those differences known.
And now you mentioned protesting peacefully. How much do you think peaceful protests and the civil rights will impact people going to the polls and going out to vote and make their voice heard?
I think it's important because it's our constitutional right. But again, it's that fine line that you have to make sure that you're standing on the opposite side of the law. It's a fine line between our civil liberties and the law. But even that, just knowing your rights, knowing what your rights are at the poll, and then even the recourses when things may go awry, that you have to be prepared for that. But change comes after resistance, and of course you have to collectively go against that. And until these different instances in law enforcement with the brutality and the senseless killings that we see, we have to, until that is brought and recognized, will it only be addressed, and that these things can stop existing.
And one last question here. Do you think that body cameras for law enforcement officials are effective?
If they're used properly, absolutely. With everything, there comes instructions, there comes maintenance, and of course, there comes accountability. So of course, if they're used properly, that serves as an aid to law enforcement as they do their jobs and know that they're covered, but to the very communities that they're protecting, that they know there's an accountability because it is being recorded.
All right, thank you so much for that. We really appreciate your time. We're getting breaking news that Jerry Nadler has won District 10.
This is not a surprise. Jerry Nadler is someone I followed very closely, one of the more established politicians in the House. Jerry Nadler has earned the nickname of the Ground Zero politician. His district, District 10, is where the Twin Tower attack was. This isn't a surprise. He's been in Congress for 20-plus years. Jerry Nadler gets his win, not a surprise here, and has a lot of support from other people like Ed Markey, like Biden. He has the support to back him up. But we're going to go to break now, and when we come back, more Hofstra Votes Live coming your way.
Hofstra Votes Live's coverage of the 2020 election continues after this.
To me, the most important thing about being in the human race isn't winning. It's participating, living life to the fullest, emphasis on living. This is what makes life, life. Yet how much of life are we willing to miss out on? Untreated hearing loss affects our mobility. It increases the risk of falls by 50%. Good hearing health is essential to staying engaged and doing what we love. Hear well and stay vital. Get a hearing health check every year.
And we are back with more election night coverage on Hofstra Votes Live.
Back at the decision desk with an update on the national polls. We're throwing over to our small wall analyst, Michael Richardson.
Thanks, Juliana. We got multiple things to tell you about tonight, and let's start with the great state of Alabama. In the state of Alabama, Republican challenger Tommy Tuberville has defeated Democratic incumbent Doug Jones. Certainly a smile on the face of many GOPers tonight, as any Senate seat that is part of the Republican Party is going to get them one step closer to the 51 seats they need for a majority. But perhaps one of the bigger stories of the night is going to be North Carolina. Now look, here's the deal. North Carolina is a pretty Republican state. It voted Republican every election since 1976, all but once in 2008 when it narrowly sided with candidate Barack Obama. But currently, the state is leading the president by only 1/10 of a point. Now, what does this mean? Well, first of all, the current president is likely losing support. It's likely losing a bit of support in suburban areas, but he's able to maintain that support in rural areas where he was really able to not only convince voters of his cause, but why the former vice president is not suited to the state of North Carolina. Counties such as Wake are likely to overwhelmingly side with the former vice president, but nevertheless, the president is still performing just a little bit better than the former vice president in the state of North Carolina. But I want to take you a little bit across the country to the great state of Arizona. Arizona, the prospect of Arizona becoming a battleground wasn't even a discussion until the latter months of the campaign. But currently, the former vice president is leading in the state of Arizona, and specifically, he's leading in Maricopa County. Maricopa County accounts for over 60% of the electorate in the state of Arizona. Simply put, it's incredibly difficult to win the state without Maricopa County. Currently, the former vice president is doing it, and not only is he doing it, he's doing it by nearly double-digit margins. If the former vice president is able to take Maricopa County, he is incredibly likely to take the Grand Canyon state. Why is he taking Maricopa County? Well, first of all, Arizona has one of the fastest growing Hispanic populations in the western United States. Over 31% of the electorate in Arizona is of Hispanic population. Now, it's not just the former vice president where the Democrats are very happy right now in the state of Arizona, but it's also the Senate. Mark Kelly, the former astronaut, is currently leading by nearly 15 points against incumbent Martha McSally. You heard that right, 1-5. That is a huge margin, even with only 40% of precincts reporting in the state of Arizona. Now, while it's still early, this could change. 2016 taught us that anything's possible, but currently the Democratic Party is likely very happy right now. That's all for me over here. Back to you at the national desk.
Thank you so much to Michael on the small wall for that national update. We're going to look a little bit deeper at some of the numbers coming in right now. Different states are being called all across the country. Utah reporting, several polls reporting, Arizona at 75% polls reporting. Crystal, Eddie, what are we seeing right now on the national presidential and congressional races?
Well, electorally, former Vice President Joe Biden is leading with 131 and Donald Trump having 108 in electoral votes. And one of the points you brought up, Eli, was Arizona, where Joseph Biden is leading with 54.2% and Donald Trump leading, following behind that with 44.6%. I find that pretty remarkable considering that this state has voted Republican in the last 5 presidential elections. What do you make of that, Eddie?
Well, I don't think it's too shocking at all. We're seeing the early numbers come in and the early counts from those mail-in votes. We are not seeing a majority being reported from these more conservative districts. So it might seem very, very exciting for Democrats, but they might want to pump the brakes a little bit and wait till we see more of these numbers coming in, because as of right now, it does not look too impressive for the Democrats for the rest of the night in terms of Arizona. And then I want to also talk about some of the trades that we've seen in the Senate. Colorado, John Hickenlooper beats out the incumbent Cory Gardner, and then in Alabama, Doug Jones, who went off against Roy Moore in that special election, has lost to Tommy Tuberville. So Alabama getting another Republican back in the Senate and closing that gap a little bit.
Do you think there's a reflection in these states between what the constituents want to see and what the numbers are currently reflecting?
I think that there are certainly different factors that will always come into who votes where these decisions are being made. However, I think that when you're looking at a state like Alabama, who couldn't go for Roy Moore, they are getting Tommy Tuberville, and they get that conservative back into their Senate. Eli, please.
Right now, we're going to toss to the newsroom where we have an interview on climate change, a very important topic recently, especially with young voters. We're going to go to Maddie Mento right now in the newsroom.
I am here with climate change expert Maddie Mento. Now, Maddie, what are the differences between Trump and Biden's plans in regards to climate change?
Yeah, so President Trump is classically a climate change denier. As we've seen, he withdrew from the Paris Accord, and he's more focused on the economy in terms of GDP and less about green energy. But according to Biden, after the first presidential debate, he claimed that his climate plan didn't align with the Green New Deal, but if you go on his site, that's where he was directing his followers. He declared that he would like to see zero emissions and neutrality by 2050, and then is also planning to redo the infrastructure to be more resilient against climate change, and wants to follow some of the concepts of the Green New Deal, but not exactly align with it.
And what do you think the impact climate change has on this current election?
I think in this current election, we're seeing a lot of focus on racial issues and coronavirus, of course, because those are extremely important. But I think we need to remember, moving forward after the next president is elected, that climate change really does affect all of us in so many ways. And it is the most important issue, because without a planet, we don't have anything at all.
Interesting. And can you talk about the key state of Texas and climate change? Is there a connection there?
Yeah, so fracking is actually really big in Texas. That's like one of the areas that it's biggest in, and fracking is bringing oil production back to America, just for anyone who wouldn't know. So that can affect the water and air quality and also release methane gas into the air. And while that isn't exactly the biggest greenhouse gas, the more we do it, the more impact it's going to have on the environment.
Thank you so much, Maddie. Now back to you guys.
Thank you so much for that very interesting interview on climate change. We're going to broaden it to the national level when we talk about climate change now. Crystal and Eddie, let's discuss the different impacts of climate change on all of the states around the country and how this might be impacting the election.
Well, Eli, when you're looking at climate change as a whole, you have two very opposite sides of the spectrum when you're looking at these two presidential candidates. You have Joe Biden, who has said time and time again, I am the candidate who believes in science. President Donald Trump chooses to ignore the science. And then on the flip side, you have Trump, who is more concerned about making sure the economy stays open and sort of deregulating those and paving away some EPA protections in order to expand jobs and create more market value.
And just to expand on that, Eddie, Trump time after time has called climate change non-existent, while Joe Biden is pro-fracking. And again, like you mentioned, this is two polarized sides, and we've seen time after time, and especially in these past months, we saw climate change happen in California, where they experienced severe wildfires. How does this, these two opposing sides, does this cause more harm than good?
I think that it certainly can't be good whenever there is a large figure disagreeing with another one about science and basic human nature when it comes to carbon emission and climate changes in general. I think, and Eli, I want to go to you. What states are we looking at in terms where climate change might be the deciding factor.
Well, you really have to, especially if we're talking about fracking. You have to look at Pennsylvania. I mean, the race is still entirely too close to call. They're saying right now that they're not going to be reporting all of the numbers for Pennsylvania until at least Friday. Right now, President Trump is actually up in the numbers in Pennsylvania with 54 to 44% in terms of percentages that we're seeing there. So Pennsylvania, definitely. But all across the country, I think you're looking at the impacts. I think even places like California, which suffered from massive wildfires. But I think the most important part to really consider is that all across the country we're seeing the effects of climate change, and that's going to be an important factor tonight, especially for the youth vote. Right now we're going to take a short break. Hofstra Votes Live. We'll be back.
There's just something about music that stirs the soul, makes us crank it, let go and come alive. This is what makes life, right? Yet what if too much of a good thing today could make us miss out on life tomorrow? 1 in 5 American teenagers now has some type of hearing loss. Loud noise is the most common cause. And these days, we're plugged in louder and longer than ever. Let's hear for life. Turn the volume down.
Thank you for tuning in. Now we're going to go to a discussion on battleground states and all of the different states that are reporting right now that have some key factors when we're talking about what we're looking for in terms of the count. Eddie, Crystal, where are we seeing key battleground states reporting right now?
Well, let's start with North Carolina. North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. We've been repeating these states. They are still too close to call. Florida and North Carolina both have 90% of the vote in. These mail-in ballots are crucial. They are within a couple 100,000 votes of each other. Every vote is going to count. North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, huge keys for Trump if he wants to get to 270, and Biden needs to win those if he wants to prevent that.
And some of the key issues in North Carolina, their main focus is on health care, education, and coronavirus. How do you think President Donald Trump has been handling those issues, especially to a state who prioritizes those 3 main points?
Well, I think that it comes down to whether or not these voters feel that the president has done an adequate job with the coronavirus response. If they feel that they are ready to reopen the economy, if they feel that that is what is most beneficial for them, then they will vote in that best interest. However, I don't want to make too many generalizations about where, and say an entire state is just a single issue state.
And right now, North Carolina, Donald Trump is leading with 49.9%, and Joseph Biden leading with 48.9%. It's a very close call right now. Where do you think this might lead to?
Again, the stars seem to be aligning for President Trump right now, but again, it will only come down if he can win these 3 states and then possibly pull out at Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Michigan. Eli, where are you looking to?
I think right now what I'm looking at is Georgia. I think we have to look at something that we haven't really discussed this evening, which is Second Amendment rights, which is a huge issue right now, especially in the South. There are several states down there that are really key on Second Amendment rights, which, of course, former Vice President Joe Biden has said that he would enact a buyback system. President Trump has said that he's all for the NRA and gun rights and the Second Amendment rights. So I think that's where I'm really looking at in terms of key battleground state issues. Right now, we're going to go to the regional anchors on the regional desk for a New York update.
Thank you, Eli. Hello and welcome back to the regional portion of Hofstra Votes Live. I'm Frank Shields.
And things are really heating up here. We have a Pennsylvania correspondent waiting in the wings. Max, what can you tell us about Pennsylvania?
Well, Pennsylvania right now is going red. 54.6% of the vote going to Donald Trump compared to the 42.7% for Joe Biden. Albeit this is with 40% reporting, so there's a lot to go still in Pennsylvania. But right now, Pennsylvania is going red. Again, the winner of Pennsylvania has an 80+% tip to win the election. Let's go to our correspondent, Lindsay Hill. Lindsay, right now, it looks like Donald Trump is winning. Is there a factor that mail-in ballots could tip it back to Biden?
As said, Pennsylvania seems to be turning red for this election. Recent reports say that about 250,000 votes in Philadelphia County will not be counted until tomorrow, which could be flipped, seeming as Donald Trump only has about a 300,000 vote lead right now. 40% of the vote is being reported. All this comes down to is really the mail-in ballots needing to be counted up until Friday. So we will not know results tonight. But for right now, it seems that Trump is winning, and it literally will all come down to these mail-in ballots. Other than that, PA apparently has had a pretty smooth voting in person today. Yeah, it's going to come down to these mail-in votes, guys.
All right, Lindsay, thank you so much for that analysis. Now on the phone, we have a Hofstra journalism major from the Middle East. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight.
Hi.
Fawaz Hassan.
Yes, hi.
What is it like watching this election from the Middle East? What's that perspective like?
So the atmosphere here in the Middle East and Kuwait, where I live specifically, is very tense over here, and we're waiting with anticipation as we did in 2016. And generally what the people in the Middle East covered on the news and what they talk about amongst one another is generally a topic of political, personal, and economic significance. We're definitely concerned about how the newly elected president will handle foreign policy specifically. We focus on what's going to happen with the sanctions on Iran, because this really affects us and our environment, because the Gulf states have heard and seen the damage caused by these sanctions, and we want to know how and what the newly elected president will do to handle this situation, because we have a very hostile environment right now.
And thank you very much again, Fawaz. And now you mentioned climate change a little bit. Guys, one of the biggest issues for Long Island is climate change. If climate change doesn't continue, we don't continue to make change here, Long Island would be completely underwater by 2050, most likely even sooner. Rachel, maybe an issue that's fallen on the wayside, and even Frank, you could probably chime in on this one too. We could have this, that we need to bring this back to the forefront here to make sure Long Island doesn't go underwater within the next 10, 20 years.
Remember, climate change is not a regional issue. If it's a problem somewhere, it's a problem everywhere. And even though this whole year has been kind of overshadowed by civil rights and coronavirus, climate change remains in the top 3 issues that voters care about. And for here on the Long Island perspective, we have Samantha Seibert, our Long Island correspondent. Sam, what's your take on this?
Hi guys, so I think we definitely have seen climate change affect Long Island. Over 8 years ago, we had Superstorm Sandy that devastated Long Island, leaving so many communities completely just devastated by flooding, tree damage. And while it's been a few years since the storm hit, so many people are still rebuilding and just getting back into their homes and their businesses. And right after the storm, too, we had a lot of erosion with beaches on Long Island. I remember Tobay Beach was completely destroyed, and it took years to build it back. And it's just getting back to normal now, and it's been almost 8 years since then. And just over the summer, too, we had Tropical Storm Isaias that caused widespread power outages and a lot of damage from trees falling and high winds. So over the years, we've definitely seen a lot more severe weather activities across Long Island. And I think it's really interesting that now, and really interesting and important to note that now a lot of Republican candidates are also starting to acknowledge the effects of climate change. I know Andrew Garbarino, who's running in District 2, has made it a point during his campaign to say he wants to protect the environment and also ensure that severe weather activities and flooding are eligible for funding for people. So I think a lot more people are starting to acknowledge the effects of climate change than ever before. So Max, Frank, Rachel, back to you guys.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Sam. Actually, we're going to be receiving more information about climate change from Maddie Minto in News Hub. Maddie, what's going on?
All right, thank you guys. Joining us once again is Maddie Minto to give us a little bit more insight on climate change, specifically here on Long Island as well as in New York. Maddie, thank you once again. So first question is, how is Long Island uniquely affected by climate change?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we're a coastal part of the country, and after the UN climate report in 2019, it had some pretty devastating reports on Long Island, because if the sea levels rise even just 2 feet, we're going to see some pretty serious flooding in Long Beach, the North Shore, the South Shore, and more than we already have. And if it raises 4 feet by the year 3000, Long Island could be underwater. So it was some pretty devastating effects.
Definitely. And also, as of March 1st, 2020, plastic carryout bags became banned by certain retailers. How has this ban actually helped New York, if at all?
Yeah, so actually the ban didn't fully go into effect until October 19th, which was about a month ago, because Governor Cuomo, with his bag effect, said that anyone who has to require taxes then has to require no more plastic bags. So while it's a good idea in theory, the best alternative would be reusable bags, because the life cycle of a brown paper bag, which is what most retailers are using now, is actually more harmful to the environment because it's more wasteful and it can cause poorer long-term effects for the environment, even though it is recyclable, unlike plastic bags.
All right, Maddie Mento, thank you so much. Now, Regional, we're going back to you.
All right, thank you for that info, Maddie and Katarina. Now we're going to even talk more about climate change and its effects on Long Island, specifically Long Beach. Max, what's going on?
Well, Long Beach, considered the beach community of Long Island. I personally am a resident there, and something that we face every year is the issue of climate change. I mean, Long Beach is the closest part of Long Island to the water, statistically looking at the island. We are the barrier island, and we are going to be hit harder, and that's an issue we need to face here on Long Island. The North Shore and the South Shores of Long Island are going to get hardest by climate change, and there needs to be change. There's been talks of renewable energy, setting up a wind farm in that area towards the ocean, but the issue comes up that it might not be the quote-unquote best for tourism. Still, this needs to be put aside. If Long Island needs to make a change to stay safe during environmental issues, they need to look to the ocean. There's space there to put wind turbines. There is space to use hydro energy. The Long Island has the space. They have the facilities. There's facilities in Montauk they can use this with. Long Island needs to take a turn to renewable energies if they want to avoid an energy crisis and prevent any more global warming, or at least slow it down so the island isn't completely underwater by 2050.
And now we're going to go to our decision desk with Eric. He has updates on District 6. Eric, what's going on?
Thank you. So Grace Meng out of District 6, the Democrat incumbent, with 62% of the vote over Thomas Zimmich, the Republican. And Matt, what does that mean for the district, for the 6th District of New York?
This means that Grace Meng will continue to take control of New York's 6th Congressional District. This is very likely, as we saw going into this election. She was highly favored. She outraised Thomas Zimmich by a great deal. She won 2018's election by over 90%. Didn't win in that much of a landslide in this election, but still she continues to hold her spot in New York's 6th Congressional District.
As we look at District 6, we have seen a lot of Democrats continue to win. What does it come down to? Is this going to be a continuation throughout the island and throughout the other districts? A lot of Democrat victories here.
Most likely will be a continuation. We've seen Districts 7 and 8 also go Democratic in this election. As Grace Meng has promised her district, she will keep housing affordable for middle-class families, and she ensures public education will be available.
Matt, thank you. We're going to kick it back to WRHU's main office.
And thank you very much, Matt and Eric. Rachel, District 6 going to Grace Meng. I know that's your home district. That's your part of Queens. Is it a surprise here to see her win, or is this a result that we've been expecting since she announced her re-election campaign?
It is not a surprise, but I'm surprised it's not a landslide. Meng is the first Asian American to be elected to District 6, as I mentioned earlier. And Thomas Mitch, the challenger, he's a retired veteran, and he supports traditional American values. I spoke with him on the phone a few weeks back, and he pulled 55,000 votes in District 6, which does surprise me. And Meng has been an incumbent since 2012, so she is really carrying that momentum into 2020 during this unprecedented year, taking the win for District 6, her 8th year in Congress.
And Grace Meng, an Asian American woman, District 6 also considered one of the most Asian American districts in the entire U.S., one of the top 5 most Asian American districts behind District 1 in Hawaii, and I believe one of the 30 districts in California. So not only is that, she appeals again to her population, as we've seen in these New York elections. She reaches out, she works with her community, and she knows who her base is, and she's using that to her advantage. Rachel, again, this is not a surprise to see her win, and she's brought good legislation forward as well to Congress.
Exactly, and District 6 is one of the most diverse districts. It's home to Flushing, Queens, which is the pinpoint location of the most diverse area. So it's a very, very key district to win, and Meng did take it. For more analysis on this, we have our New York City correspondent, Athena Dawson. Athena Dawson, what's your reaction?
Breaking news, as you guys have said before, Democratic incumbent Grace Meng has won her congressional race by 62% with 94,000 votes. As you guys had stated, this is not an upset, which is very surprising. Her district is 49% Asian and 36% white, which could play into her favorability, as people of her demographic probably see favorability with her. Some of her policies include protecting public school funding and lowering interest rates of student loans. So she really seems to be supporting the younger community and supporting people who have college debt. In addition, she supports veterans' issues and wants to require legal counsel for vulnerable immigrants. And on her website, she has detailed information about COVID safety and information on securing PPP loans for small businesses. Back to you guys.
All right, Athena, those are some great points. We're going to toss to a break. We'll have more Hofstra Votes Live coming up next.
I'm Dr. Shelley Flace with today's tip for kids from the American Academy of Pediatrics. If you own firearms, it's your responsibility to make sure they're always stored safely. Hiding them in a closet or drawer is not enough. Kids know where they are. Research shows the risk of injury and death is lower if guns are stored unloaded and locked up, with the ammunition locked in a separate place. This is important when children are young, as well as when they grow into teenagers. For more, talk with your pediatrician or visit healthychildren.org.
Returning live is the School of Communications election night coverage. Hofstra Votes Live.
Welcome back to the national coverage of the 2020 election, Hofstra Votes Live, a collaboration with the Heat Network and WRHU Hempstead 88.7 FM. I'm Eddie Fitzgerald. We have a lot more polls closing at 10 p.m. We're still trying to get the information out to you guys as best we can, but I want to turn to stuff that we've already seen a little bit today. Texas, still too close to call. Florida, still too close to call. Georgia, still too close to call. North Carolina, still too close to call. Crystal, Eli, Biden has been doing extremely well in the suburbs compared to Hillary in 2016. Does that give him an advantage heading into Wisconsin and Michigan, who still are only less than 50% of the polls in?
Earlier, former Vice President Joe Biden really needs to pull either Wisconsin or Michigan if he hopes to win this election. Right now, it seems like Ohio is really running away with President Trump. Of course, as we've mentioned all night, there's no way to tell necessarily who's going to win the general election because there are so many ballots coming in with mail-in ballots. But if we're looking at Wisconsin and Michigan right now, both with 41 and 39% reporting respectively, I mean, right now they both look as though they're going to President Trump, but they're very close races. And as Eddie mentioned before, the suburbs is a part of these states and states around the country that Trump really secured in the 2016 election that Hillary did not. And for Biden to sort of be almost running away and pulling ahead with these suburban voters, I think says a lot about the demographic that he is pitched to as sort of this champion of the middle class, as he calls himself.
And just to go off of that, being the champion of the middle class, specifically in Ohio, he reclaimed that he was going to get a lot of those union workers to vote for him. And right now we're seeing that they're actually in favor of Donald Trump right now. What do you make of that, Eli?
Well, as I said, I think that a lot of those votes that are coming in right now, we still need to see the mail-in ballots, but I think it's very important for him that he's sort of pulling ahead with this suburban vote. What we have right now is results that are coming in from the West Coast as polls are closing, with California, Oregon, and Wisconsin all early being declared in favor of former Vice President Joe Biden. Eddie, what do you think of the West Coast being declared blue?
Well, these were all very quick snap calls, as expected. That blue wall on the East Coast sort of sandwiching in that red in the middle. And then now we see 205 to 112. So for the Trump campaign, should not panic right now. They have plenty of time to make up the ground. There is still plenty of electoral votes out there. But Biden campaign officials should not be too eager to call this one for themselves now that they've hit 200 and they have 65 left to go.
the vote that we really need to be looking at right now is Arizona, with about 75% of the polls reporting right now. Former Vice President Joe Biden is in the lead, according to the New York Times, with a 53.7% lead over Donald Trump's 45%. How important is it that President Trump wins Arizona if he hopes to take home the 270 tonight?
Well, I think Arizona will definitely give us a large snapshot of where the state stands. And specifically looking at the demographics here, if we look, they have a lot of key issues that they want to resolve, a lot of it being regarding with the whole wall border and Trump, whether or not he's going to continue funding that. And so I think if we look closely into Arizona, like you mentioned, they're leading, Joe Biden's leading with 53.7, Donald Trump with 44.3. I think it'll definitely say a lot when we see the final results come in.
Eddie, any final thoughts?
Well, no, because we have to go to the small wall right now. There are numbers to break down. Sit back, buckle your seatbelts. We're about to go on a tour through the continental United States. And let's start with Missouri. Now, Missouri is the second biggest bellwether in the United States, behind, of course, the Buckeye State with Ohio. But recently, since the 2008 election, the Show Me State has veered Republican. In 2008, it overwhelmingly sided with McCain. In 2012, it overwhelmingly sided with Romney. And in 2016, by 18 points, it sided with President Trump. Now, why is it such a huge margin? Well, with Missouri, there's a massive rural-urban divide. You got big cities like Kansas City and St. Louis on opposite sides of the state. And then you got the big rural wall on the south, on the north, and all throughout the state that really lends it that Republican support. Perhaps it will be able to maintain its bellwether status tonight, but we'll just have to wait and see. Now let's go to the state of Georgia. Now, Georgia, much like Arizona, was not considered a battleground until the waning months of the campaign. But currently, with roughly 60% of the vote, the president is leading by roughly 10 points. Now, double-digit margins are anything for a candidate to get excited about, but it is still very early in the night. If the president is able to amass the same support he garnered in 2016, with just a little more, perhaps through those mail-in votes, then he will very likely pick up the state of Georgia. But that's going to have to be a story that we will elaborate on throughout the night. Now, take a road trip for a few days and you are at the West Coast, the other part of the Blue Wall. California, Oregon, and Washington have all gone for the former Vice President Joe Biden. And this isn't too much of a surprise. It is to be expected. These states are Blue Wall states that were expected to side with the former Vice President, and they're doing it tonight. He's currently leading with 209 electoral votes. Not 270 yet. It's going to be very interesting to see it throughout the night. That's all from me over here. Your seatbelts unbuckled. Back to you at the National Desk.
Thank you so much for that update, Michael, on the small wall. We're going to take it right now to Juliana on the decision desk for an interview.
Well, with almost all of the reporting in for the presidential race in Florida, President Donald Trump has a 4-point lead. I'm joined by Kate right now. Kate, can you break down these numbers for us?
Well, Juliana, the entire country has their eyes on the state of Florida this evening, with a lot of the results pointing towards President Trump, but still too close to call. Florida has been a key state in this election, with both candidates being there just on Thursday in the same area as the Tampa Bay area, which is very rare to see both candidates in the same state, never mind the same area. President Trump was there on Sunday night holding a rally in Miami, with plenty of support coming from his supporters. I think Florida is going to be a very key state for both candidates in order to win victory for the President of the United States. One thing that was very key in the state of Florida this year was the amount of record voting for early ballots. You set records with 9 million people voting in the state of Florida early. And I think today also record numbers coming to vote in person. Again, too close to call, but a great lookout in Florida with voting records.
Can you talk about what the historical value of winning Florida has been for a presidential election?
Well, just 4 years ago, we watched President Trump barely win Florida against Secretary Hillary Clinton. And then also President Obama won the state of Florida. So it's always been a very key state for the presidential elections, always been a key swing state. But here we see record number votings in the state of Florida will play a huge part in who takes the lead in the Electoral College.
Thank you so much, Kate. Now we're going to go back over to the national desk with Eddie Fitzgerald.
Thank you so much, Juliana. Lots of great stuff to unpack there, guys. Florida, still super influential. 94% of it is in. It's leaning Donald Trump, but it's still too close to call. And then California, making that projection of being a 55 straight for Biden, it's very huge at this point in the night. Eli, Crystal, any more?
I think when we're looking at California and Florida, we have to talk about the fact that they are two very different states in terms of what's important to voters. So if we're looking at California, obviously California has been impacted by the wildfires this year more than any other. So we really have to look at what they're thinking about when it comes to what they're voting for. Of course, climate change has come off as more important to former Vice President Biden when he talks about bringing us back into the Paris Climate Accord, when he talks about what he would do with things like that, whereas President Trump has said that he doesn't believe that climate change is a huge issue. Whereas in Florida, what we're looking at is health care. Most of the voters there want more health care plans and want their own private plans, something that's more important to voters down there, which apparently is helping the Trump campaign as he's currently winning down in Florida. They're also more concerned with COVID-19 as the spikes have happened in Florida. So clearly two very different issues. Voters in California being more conservative on the side of how they want to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, having so many spikes, and then Democratic governor really cracking down on the COVID-19 effort. So I think what we really have to talk about is how different these two states are, regardless of how crucial both are to the campaigns.
I think when we look closely even into Florida, a major factor that's playing in there, a lot of Puerto Ricans moved into Florida after Hurricane Isaias, and they moved there because of all the damage that was done, and a lot of them are upset with how President Donald Trump handled Puerto Rico and not giving them that much aid and help. And so they're also going to be reflecting in tonight's voting, in tonight's election, and we'll definitely see a voter turnout from a lot of Puerto Ricans in that demographic.
Eddie, any final thoughts from you?
Well, we're now going to go over and toss it over to Amdalat Ajasa for an update from Illinois. Amdi.
Thanks, guys. I am here giving you an update from Minnesota. Things are heating up here in the Midwest. Just in, Ilhan Omar has won the U.S. House seat in Minnesota's 5th congressional district. Omar has been the center of scrutiny by Donald Trump. He has said that she, along with AOC, has plans to turn the Democratic Party into a socialist and communist party. He has also attacked her religion, being a Muslim woman, and he has also attacked her home country. In Iowa's Senate race, it looks as though Joni Ernst, the Republican incumbent, is currently falling to her Democratic challenger, Teresa Greenfield. Granted, there are only 22 ballots processed as of right now, but it looks like Greenfield is leading by about 54.7%. Joni Ernst got herself into a little bit of trouble with the economic instability in Iowa. A lot of people are blaming her for the issues that the state is seeing. In a recent debate, she chose not to either align herself with Donald Trump, but she also did not push Donald Trump's agenda away from her platform. So it kind of left her in a weird gray area. Not to mention she fumbled on questions about farming, which is a huge topic in Iowa. The state didn't lock down like a lot of states did during COVID-19, and they are still experiencing those huge economic instabilities in their businesses. A lot of businesses there are closing down and aren't opening up again. And like we said before, that state did not shut down like other states have. So people are really heavily scrutinizing her for that. Looking at the economics of Minnesota and Wisconsin as well, and just the demographics of who is voting for who, rural areas in Minnesota and in Wisconsin are big things to keep an eye out for. I think both Joe Biden and Donald Trump realized that this state is really important for them, and they've been coming to both the states this past week to try to get their final plea out for voters. Both these states have really close races. Joe Biden looks to have a 58.1% lead in Minnesota, and like we said, Wisconsin is still too close to count right now.
Well, thank you, Amdalat, on that update in the Midwest. We're now going to toss it over to a package on Latinx voters.
This year marks the first election in which Latinos are expected to be the nation's largest racial or ethnic minority. According to a Pew Research Center study, their vote will account for over 13% of all eligible voters, with 32 million projected to vote. In some swing states, like Florida, Latinos are more likely to vote Republican.
In Florida, you have a large Cuban population. And so that percentage or portion of the Latino vote does tend to be much more conservative.
The Latino vote is also present in red states. Some of them, like Texas and Arizona, are now considered purple states, with Joe Biden having a chance of turning them blue.
You know, they are an important constituency, particularly in those two states. And the question just becomes, are they going to get out and vote?
For activists, this issue is a common concern, as the Latino demographic has the lowest voter turnout.
Particularly in, let's say, newer citizens of the U.S., they may not have the civic education that people that have grown up here have, so they may not have the access and the information to know where to get the registration, how to go and vote.
The Latino vote will play a large role in the outcome of the election. However, the power of the Latino community's vote will rely on how many of its members show up to the polls this election. For Hofstra Votes Live, I'm Antonio Francischini.
We'll be back with more Hofstra Votes Live after this.
Hey, this is Kevin Love from the Cleveland Cavaliers. At times, life can feel scary, and we can get overwhelmed by anxiety. Mindfulness can help you get through these tough times. My nonprofit is partnering with Headspace to offer free content to help you stress less. It's as easy to do as this. Take a big, deep breath in through the nose, out through the mouth. In and out. Head to kevinlovefund.org/headspace and be kind to your mind.
Hello and welcome back to the regional portion of Hofstra Votes Live. I'm Frank Shields. It's certainly been an eventful night in both the Northeast and around the country. New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut have all been called for Joe Biden, but Pennsylvania remains too close to call. Several New York congressional districts have been called, with most recording Democratic victories. In New York, Carolyn B. Maloney won the 12th district. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was declared the victor in the 14th district. Gregory Meeks was elected unopposed to the 5th district, and Grace Meng beat out her opponent in the 6th district. Max, why don't you give us an update on Long Island district elections?
Well, Frank, 5 crucial districts in Long Island up for election this year. Let's start in District 1 with that race. Nobody yet. Nancy Goroff versus Lee Zeldin. No results yet. They are still tabulating votes and making sure numbers come in. In District 2 right now, 18% of the vote is in. Andrew Garbarino leads his opponent, Jackie Gordon. In District 3, we have some results coming in as well, with Tom Swazi leading in District 3. District 4, there are still no results as well for Kathleen Rice's district. And in District 5, Gregory Meeks wins unopposed again. So right now, we have 1 district final, 2 with their votes still getting counted, and 2 who have not even started yet. That's the Long Island update. And it'll be interesting to see how the other districts go, as right now, New York City, every district except District 11, where incumbent Max Rose is losing to Nicole Maliotakis, has been called. Rachel?
Now, let's talk about how we voted, right? As college students, the youth vote matters so much. We're going to talk about how we voted either absentee or in person, as this is our first presidential election. Max, how did you vote?
Well, I chose to vote in person. This was my second ever election I got to vote in. My first one was a primary back when I still lived in Illinois. I got to vote in that when I was 18 years old. I exercised my right to vote. But after that, this year was my first ever presidential election I got to vote in. It was very interesting. For the Long Beach, my polling place, I had a 10-minute total time there. It was about 5 minutes of waiting, 5 minutes of me filling out my ballot, and then I left. And that's compared to one of our other people that we work with here. Other people have had to wait an hour, 2 hours of waiting just to get their ballot in and get their polls in. But it's very interesting to see the difference in communities. And Long Beach is a predominantly white community, and I only had to wait 10 minutes just to cast my vote. Rachel, Frank, how did you guys vote?
Well, for me, I voted absentee, and you got to make sure to fill out the entire ballot and do your research on local candidates. Local government matters so much and impacts your life just as much as the presidential election, if not more. So I voted absentee. I kind of knew that I wouldn't have time to go to the polls. But Frank, how did you vote in this election?
Well, like many of you, this is my first time voting in a presidential election. As both of you know, I'm from Houston, Texas, so I went through absentee ballot, just like you, Rachel, and I say it was more of the safe option instead of me having to travel all the way back to Texas, because why would I do that? Or because I felt very nervous about going and voting in person But right now, we're actually going to go and get a report from our Long Island correspondent, Sam Seibert. Sam, what's going on?
Yeah, guys. So, I specifically want to talk about women in politics. I know this has been a big talking point this year with the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, and much of the movement for women's suffrage occurred in New York. Upstate, there was a Seneca Falls Convention to discuss the rights of women in many aspects of life, but specifically politics. And here on Long Island, we have a few women competing for congressional seats. In District 4, we have Kathleen Rice, who's running for her 4th term in Congress. Rice is the only woman in Congress from Long Island, and so far she's up about 20,000 votes in her district. Running for Congress in District 1, we have Nancy Goroff, who is not a politician but a scientist, who's been really vocal about the COVID-19 pandemic and how it has been handled by both Trump and Lee Zeldin. And in District 2, we have veteran Jackie Gordon, who's running against Republican Assemblyman Andrew Garbarino. Both Goroff and Gordon support abortion, funding for Planned Parenthood, and they want to eliminate the wage gap and provide paid family leave. So Max, Frank, Rachel, what do you guys have to add about women in politics?
And now we are joined by Dr. Parati. Professor, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And now, first question here. How are women represented in this election cycle? Are we seeing more female candidates than we usually would see?
Well, in the last congressional election cycle, we saw a real surge in women's candidacies, and that is
That's
really...
on here, yeah. All right. Got it.
Can we hear you? Can you hear me?
Yes, keep going, Professor.
And so Congress, the current Congress has 127 women, which is a record number, 23.7% of the seats in the Congress. That is we're likely to have commensurate numbers in the next Congress. What we'll really be looking for in the next few years is an increase in the numbers of Republican women candidates. The Republican Party simply has not had as many new candidacies from women.
A lot of women are deeply concerned about losing their rights, especially in the Supreme Court, with the rushed nomination of Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Tell me about the concerns that women have in this country because of the 6-3 conservative majority in the court.
Yeah, that it is a concern, and Judge Amy Coney Barrett has made it clear that she is not a supporter of broad abortion rights. I think there are a couple of routes towards correction. If the Democrats win the presidency, Biden will have to think about whether he's ready to get behind a move to pack the Supreme Court, that is, to add additional seats to the Supreme Court. There are other kinds of things, too, that women have to be concerned about, and one of them, of course, is health care, reproductive health care, as well as in general health care. Women tend to be the caretakers for their families. So a great deal is at stake. And if the Democrats win, again, we can rely upon a Biden presidency and at least the Democratic House. It's not clear what's going to happen in the Senate to help to secure those rights. If that doesn't come to pass, then it's going to be a long few years of women's mobilizing to run for office and to support candidates for office at in state assemblies, state senates, and ultimately once again in Congress in 2 years, in the House in 2 years.
Now, Dr. Parati, one other question I had was, are the results of local and regional elections more relevant to reproductive rights and access to contraception than the results of the presidential election itself?
That's a really good question, because reproductive rights also are dependent on zoning, whether or not clinics can be located, for instance, in an area. State legislative decisions, that is, state laws, because states have, there's quite a bit of variation across states about those sorts of things. And so your question suggests a really important fact for anyone who's concerned about reproductive rights, and that is it's not enough to vote in national elections. It's really important to vote in local and state elections and to do your homework, as your correspondent just said, about the candidates, because it is local councils that do the that do the zoning and the citing of all sorts of land use, and it's state legislatures that make the policy regarding health and health care.
Now, Dr. Parati, you did briefly mention female local elected officials, both on the national level also. Can you talk about the obstacles women do face in politics, even just pointing out how Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in District 14 did face harassment earlier this year from Representative Yoho. So what kind of obstacles and challenges do women face in politics?
One of the biggest obstacles that women face is going to be something that you're going to kind of smile at. It is a lack of ambition to go into politics. It's at your age, at the age of our students at Hofstra and in the university, that young men and women begin to acquire this ambition to go into public life. And young women still, even at this late date, young women trail behind young men in that kind of ambition. Is it because young women still think about the more traditional roles that they might have or that they wish to exercise, childbearing, taking care of families, then taking care of parents? It's not clear. But as far as other kinds of opportunities, women, it is true, you're right, women do face obstacles, and people look at what they wear in a way that they don't look at what men wear. People expect them to smile and to be cheerful, and accuse them of being dour and disagreeable when they are simply being businesslike. I mean, all of those things are annoying things that women candidates and public officials have to put up with. But by and large, women don't have today the kind of discrimination that they faced, let's say, 30 years ago when I first started teaching about women in politics, with regard to people's willingness to back their candidacies. And that's a real blessing. We have a candidate for Congress here in Long Island, Jackie Gordon, who's really raising money, not having an easy time, but being very successful at raising funds in her congressional campaign. Years ago, you would have had a much harder, a more difficult time. Parties were less likely to recruit women to run for office. They were less likely to mobilize funding for them. And that's not really the issue anymore for women. It's more gaining the experience that's required to run for office. Gordon, for instance, was a town councilwoman. But being able to have been an incumbent remains a challenge for women. And again, the ambition to run for office. Tellingly, Jackie Gordon and Nancy Goroff out here in Suffolk County are older women whose children, I know Jackie Gordon's son is a grown, and more often than not, women choose to take that path to run for office later on in life so as to sidestep, the responsibilities that they may have for childcare and all the rest.
All right, Dr. Rosanna Priotti, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. It really seems like women's rights have made progress over the years, but there's still so much work left to do.
There is, and now we move from women's rights to the floor of the Trump Tower, where right now Orania Sofia Yankopoulos, co-president of the Columbia Law Women's Association, is there right now. Professor, thank you for joining us tonight.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Now, Professor, what have you seen tonight at the floor of Trump Tower? What have you seen in that area?
So I have to admit, I've been on the ground between Columbus Avenue, where the Trump Tower at Columbus Circle is, and also here on the corner of 56th and 5th Avenue for the last hour and a half. And I have to say that the city has never been so quiet. I was pretty shocked and awed by the lack of either Trump supporters or dissenters here on the ground. There were news outlets stationed here at this corner, Pix 11, CBS, ABC News 7, but really nothing to cover.
All right. I wanted to ask, around Trump Tower, since Trump has many followers, many constituents who will do anything, are there any riots going around Trump Tower as we speak?
No, zero. The streets are remarkably quiet, remarkably empty. There are police officers stationed, both just patrolling the streets and in vans around the area, but no rioters and no supporters. I will mention that there was a group of probably 4 to 5 Trump supporters on the corner of 56th and 5th Avenue across from the Trump Tower. But in talking to news reporters who have been covering the area for weeks, they say that these people are here daily. So it's not the election night that brought them out here, but rather their support for Trump over a prolonged period of time.
All right, thank you so much for that analysis, getting the update on the energy in Trump Towers. We're going to a break. We'll be back more with Hofstra Votes Live coming up next.
Healthcare troops and first responders are on the front line fighting it every day. Let's join the fight by staying home. Staying home is not a retreat. It's the most brave and aggressive weapon we have against this enemy. Because when we do stay at home, we help prevent overwhelming our hospitals while buying time for our scientists to find the vaccine. And that is how we beat it.
Welcome back. I'm Crystal Bermudez, and here we are at Hofstra Votes Live. We're going to throw it over to the News Hub, where we can get more updates on tonight's election.
Thank you, guys. Now I'm here with Editor-in-Chief of the Hofstra Chronicle, Melanie Haid. Melanie, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Can't complain. So, what can readers expect from the 2020 election edition of the Chronicle?
So in this special edition, it's going to be a little bit of a shortened issue. We're going to have news, features, multimedia, and the opinion section. We have a lot of different things that we're going to cover. There's not going to be a clear outcome of the election. So we have a lot of different what-ifs going on, a lot of different kinds of opinions. We have pieces on Hofstra Votes Live. We have pieces on climate change, everything you can possibly think of that covers the election.
And I understand that you guys have been working remotely. What was that process like? How is it?
It's a lot of Zoom calls, and it's a lot of late hours, a lot of communication on Slack, but it's going pretty well so far. Yeah, it's a good team.
Thank you so much, Melanie, for your time. Back to you guys.
Thank you, Jermaine. We're going to now take the topic on abortion rights. Eli and Eddie, what do you guys have to say about abortion rights, and what is at stake here?
Well, frankly, a lot is at stake for women in general who believe in a woman's right to choose. Amy Coney Barrett, being nominated and approved and is now sitting on the Supreme Court, making a 6-3 majority. Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett have both been major proponents for overturning Roe v. Wade and talking about the precedent. Coney Barrett has said that it's also not a landmark case when describing the Supreme Court, unlike the justice that she replaced, Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I mean, when Trump came into the 2016 campaign, he was very clear that he wanted to put pro-life justices and judges all throughout the country, and he has delivered on that promise since 2016. In the last 4 years, he has appointed many judges and now justices, 3 justices to the Supreme Court, all with pro-life views.
And Eli, as we're looking at the election, we mentioned before how Biden is doing better in the suburbs. And one area in which abortion rights are very prominent is white suburban women. Do you see that Biden's stance on abortion or Trump's stance on abortion is making any difference at all in these areas?
I think it has to. I think you're absolutely right in that it plays a vital role in some women and even men in how they vote. Former Vice President Joe Biden has been very clear on his stance as a pro-choice supporter. He himself has said that he does not necessarily believe that abortion is correct, but he's also said that he believes that abortion is a woman's right to choose, whereas President Trump has taken a completely different stance.
Crystal, where are you at with this?
Well, Eddie, just recently, Senator Amy Klobuchar had told her voters to protest against Amy Coney Barrett by petitioning their representatives. Again, she disagrees with a lot of her viewpoints. Now we're going to take it over to the newsroom where we have an update with our health experts.
All right, thank you guys. Now I'm joined by Damali Ramirez, who is going to tell us a little bit about some breaking news that we have in Louisiana. Apparently, they are set to vote yes on a certain amendment that you can tell us a little bit more about.
Yes. So as we may know, Louisiana is hoping that the confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett will essentially overturn Roe v. Wade. However, if that doesn't happen, they are voting on a state constitution amendment that will essentially defund the protection of abortion, as well as no longer have the rights to an abortion.
So what does this mean for women's reproductive rights in general? Does that mean they'll also lose control of possibly being able to get birth control?
We don't know yet, but for sure abortion's on the line, which may make it illegal and make it difficult for a woman to seek abortions, as well as, put a lot of women's life in danger.
Do you know if any surrounding states have any other, are going to follow suit with their potential laws if Roe v. Wade does not get overturned?
We don't know yet. So far, Louisiana is the only state that we know right now that is set to vote yes.
All right, Damali Ramirez, thank you so much for joining us. Back to you guys.
Thank you so much, Katarina. That was a great interview. We're going to head over to the small wall now, where Steven's going to break down some numbers.
Thank you, Eddie. And we have some breaking news from North Carolina. We are projecting that tonight, incumbent Democrat Roy Cooper will hold on to his governorship seat there in the state of North Carolina. Of course, the 2 other races that we're watching in the state are the presidential election, which is too close to call at this point. That's at 94% of the expected vote that's come in already. And of course, this state holds 15 electoral votes. Even the Vice President Pence had said that the path to victory for the Trump campaign goes straight through North Carolina, and it's a state that they're hoping to hold on to that slim margin that they have right now. The other race, of course, that we're looking at is the Senate race, where there's an even smaller margin with current incumbent Tom Tillis, the Republican, edging out his opponent Cal Cunningham. Of course, this is a very close race. All 2 of these races in the state are super close. I wanted to also take you back to what we were talking about earlier in the night, and that's the state of Ohio. When we look to the state of Ohio, it has actually shifted from earlier in the night, where it was more in the former vice president's favor, but now has shifted toward President Trump, and he has a sizable lead by about 8 points. Of course, with 94% of the vote in, it is still too early to call. However, this has shifted and looks more like 2016 for this state. Of course, we're going to be watching other states throughout the night, like Wisconsin and Michigan, and all these states on the blue wall. But of course, now we're going to turn to Eli, where she'll have more information for us.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for that update on the small wall. Let's continue the conversation, Eddie, with the discussion on North Carolina and Ohio, two very, very close races.
No, you're absolutely right. Within 100,000 votes is right now is what the totals are at between Trump, who is leading by just a point in North Carolina, versus Biden, who trails by just a point. It is still anybody's contest here. And the districts that still have to come in are certainly the suburban areas just outside of Raleigh, Greensboro, and Charlotte. Can Trump hold on to the supporters that he had in 2016?
And of course, we've been going back and forth between these three key states all evening: North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, with Trump pulling ahead just by a bit in Georgia and Florida, but North Carolina, such a close race, as is Ohio. Now, right now we have about 95% votes reporting in North Carolina. Do you think that it's possible that Biden could still turn this around and grab the last 5%?
I would say that it is not out of the question. I would say that it is very 50-50. If I had to make a guess right now, I would probably say that Trump holds on to North Carolina and lives to fight another day in Pennsylvania. However, Crystal, I do want to hear what you have to say about this. Where are you at with North Carolina right now?
Well, Eddie, it's still very close here, like you guys mentioned. Donald Trump has 50% leading, and right behind him is Joe Biden with 48%. And again, it could be anyone's call. And I think once we see the final numbers on North Carolina, we're going to see a reflection on how Ohio and Pennsylvania will also vote. Ohio being the neighboring state to Pennsylvania, and Ohio right now is leading Donald Trump with 53.2% and Joe Biden with 45%. So these three main states, we have North Carolina, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, again, crucial states that will depict how the rest of the night will look.
Well, you mentioned the Midwest, Crystal, so let's head over to our Midwest correspondent, Amdalata Jassa. And we're having a little bit of technical difficulties here reaching Amdi. We'll try to get back to her as soon as possible because I would love to hear what she has to say about this. Oh, she's great. She's here. Amdi, take it away.
Sorry for that confusion before, but yes, we are getting a lot of results here in Minnesota. So in Minnesota, there are 50% of the votes have been processed, and of that 50%, it looks like Joe Biden has a 55% poll in Minnesota. Wisconsin, it looks like 77% of their ballots have been processed, and of that 77%, it looks like it is leaning towards Donald Trump with a 51.7% lead. Iowa has 61% of their ballots processed, and before I was talking about how Joni Ernst was trailing, but now it looks like she has taken the lead with about a 1% lead over her Democratic candidate, or her Democratic person that's running against her. And Donald Trump is also ahead by about 2% in Iowa. So these races are really tight. It's going to be something that we could look forward to and watch all night. Speaking about the demographics of the states, I was really looking into the rural areas for both Minnesota and Wisconsin. Rural is, as we know, has been Donald Trump's base, and he's been really coming to Minnesota and Wisconsin to try to get to that base. But one thing I want to look at, especially in Minnesota's case, is the thing that he has just approved, or that is in the process of being approved in the Boundary Waters. The Boundary Waters is a huge and beautiful site in Minnesota, and it's rural, it's in the northernmost part of Minnesota. And those people love the Boundary Waters. It's a part of their culture. And he just approved copper mining in the Boundary Waters, which is an untouched spot in the northernmost part of Minnesota. The copper mining would take about 100 years to extract all of the minerals and 500 years to clean up. Donald Trump has really run on the idea that he's going to bring back those jobs in both Minnesota and Wisconsin. And we're seeing that in Wisconsin as well. Wisconsin lost a lot of their manufacturing jobs due to outsourcing. You can see that trade with the trade war with China. So he and Joe Biden have both been really trying to get Minnesota and Wisconsin. And it looks like right now that Wisconsin is pulling more towards Donald Trump and Minnesota is pulling more towards Joe Biden. That is all for your Midwest update right now. I am Amdalata Jassa. Now back to you guys on the East Coast.
Thank you, Amdalat, for that amazing update. Just to give a quick recap, Joe Biden's leading with 209 electoral votes and Donald Trump with 118. We're going to take it to a quick break.
We will have more election coverage coming up next on Hofstra Votes Live.
I'm Dr. Shelley Flace with today's tip for kids from the American Academy of Pediatrics. If you own firearms, it's your responsibility to make sure they're always stored safely. Hiding them in a closet or drawer is not enough. Kids know where they are. Research shows the risk of injury and death is lower if guns are stored unloaded and locked up, with the ammunition locked in a separate place. This is important when children are young, as well as when they grow into teenagers. For more, talk with your pediatrician or visit healthychildren.org.
Hello and welcome back to Hofstra Votes Live. You're joining us here on the regional side. Right now we are joined by Hofstra student Fawaz Hassan giving us the report from the Middle East. Fawaz, what is the update in the Middle East?
Hi. So right now everything is quite tense. We're waiting with anticipation on what's going to happen. This is pretty much a global event. It's not just an American event. So we're all watching, and the general idea in what the news over here covers is practically foreign policy. And one of the main issues has been the sanctions in place on Iran, because there has been some hostility in our environment. So it's a very key issue with us. And another key issue that's not just political but personal as well, and to me, is Syria. I have a lot of Syrian friends, and when I call them just to check up on them, I can hear the gunshots in the background. So it's a very rough environment they're in, and we're in this sense. So we're really trying to see what the newly elected president will go and what he'll do in terms of foreign policy. And another issue that has come up this year specifically has been climate change. Usually, the Middle East news doesn't really cover that. It's usually foreign policy, but having the Gulf states provide 31% of the world's oil, this is our means of income. It's our livelihood. So it's definitely a key issue for us, and we want to see how climate change could practically be a hopeful outlook for us, but it's quite uncertain at the same time. And overall, we're all watching with anticipation, sleepless nights. That's all I can say.
And as an international student, what was it like in terms of travel restrictions for you during this tumultuous year?
Oh, the uncertainty was very nerve-wracking. It was my first year traveling alone. I was scared as is, and then you have all of this, and you don't know what's going to happen to you. You know what I mean. So the uncertainty was very disturbing.
And thank you again, Fawaz, for joining us tonight on Hofstra Votes Live. And now, more developments coming out of Pennsylvania with mail-in voting and people trying to restrict people to get to the polls. Let's go to our Pennsylvania correspondent, Lindsay Hill. Lindsay, can you update us with what's going on in Pennsylvania?
Instances of voter suppression today in Pennsylvania. People in Northwest Philly have been confused over their polling places. It said that they had received, their polling location in September where they were supposed to go. And it showed that when they showed up to the polls, they were given the incorrect polling location. Then they were turned away from their polls. More scary things come in Erie, Pennsylvania, as I mentioned earlier, with the open carry group wanting to bring their guns to monitor the polls, which is a clear tactic of voter suppression. A woman in Lancaster County attempted to set fire to a polling place today. It's unaware what side she's on, but all of these are very odd attempts at voter suppression coming up today. Governor Wolf says that we've had a pretty normal day for elections, but these few outliers make us all concerned.
Thank you, Lindsay. We're actually going to go over to the newsroom now with Katerina Balales, and she's going to give us more information surrounding what's going on right now. Katerina?
All right, thank you guys so much. Now, Emma DeSimone is back to join us again. This time we're going to be talking about voter suppression, specifically in New York, as well as here on Long Island. So Emma, whether it's tonight or it has been in elections in the past, how has Long Island and New York seen voter suppression?
Well, when it came to mail-in ballots, 100,000 voters in Brooklyn and Long Island got the wrong ballot with their wrong name. So they had to resend them back, or else if they sent them in, it wouldn't be counted.
So have we seen any other major examples of voter suppression within the polls tonight in other states?
Yes, so long lines have been prevalent throughout the nation, as well as burst pipes in Georgia, which is going to delay the voting, and throwing out the ballots in certain counties.
Right, okay. Emma DeSimone, thank you guys so much. Now we're going to head back to regional.
Going on in the news hub tonight. Well, Frank, Rachel, more results are coming in, and we're starting to get movement in Long Island as well. In District 1 through 1% reporting, Lee Zeldin is beating Nancy Goroff 59.1% of the vote to 40.9% of the vote. Are we surprised at this huge early jump for Lee Zeldin in District 1?
There's almost a 20-point margin between the two. I expect it to be a little bit tighter, but Frank, what's your reaction?
Honestly, I'm not surprised about Lee Zeldin taking on this lead. His constituents are very loyal to him. The district is more so 67% Caucasian, with 21% made of Black and Hispanic population. And he's very adamant about holding China accountable for COVID, U.S. manufacturing, and education. So he has he's getting at his constituents, and he's getting a lot of. But what Max and Rach? What do you think?
And Frank, as you did point out, he does echo a lot of Trump's policies. And don't forget that Suffolk County is a pivot county, meaning that they voted for Donald Trump in 2016, but voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012. Max, are you surprised with this red wave on Long Island persisting?
Not at all. I mean, you look at a rural area like Suffolk County where the money is as well. You have a rural area mixed with areas with high money. That's Suffolk County. You're going to get supporters. Those supporters typically go red. And for more information about District 1, we have our own Sam Seivert. Sam, what can you tell us about District 1 as results are coming in?
Well, I have to say I'm not very surprised. Zeldin won. This is his fourth term that he's going to be in Congress, and I think he has a lot of support from, it's a majority Republican district. Like you said, it's very rural. There's also a lot of wealthy people out east in the Hamptons, very wealthy district, and I think they really supported him. I know he aligned himself very closely with President Trump, and I think in that district it really helped him. There are a lot of Trump supporters out east. I know this year we saw a lot of parades going on out in Suffolk County. So I definitely think all of that has helped Zeldin, and especially the way he handled COVID-19. I know he got a lot of funding for his district, and he also secured PPE for businesses that were struggling. So I think everything that he did really helped him to win. I know also some things he's focusing on in his next term. He wants to bring manufacturing back to the United States, especially during the pandemic, where so many people are out of work and are struggling to make ends meet. He really wants to bring manufacturing back to the United States, especially back to his county, which I think would definitely has helped him. So Max, Frank, Rachel, you guys have anything else to add?
All right, Samantha, our Long Island correspondent, thank you so much for that analysis. Now moving on to the topic of voter suppression and intimidation, we're joined again by Dr. Roseanne Parati. Dr. Parati, how are you tonight? Starting off, when you talk about voter intimidation and suppression, is it worse this year than in previous elections? Dr. Parati, can you hear us? All right, Max, what's your reaction to voter suppression and how high the tension is this year with this election? Do you think that the violence and the threats are better or worse, especially with this election?
I think it's worse. We're hearing about violence in places like Philadelphia where people are getting attacked. They're burning down places as well near polling areas. There is extreme violence happening this year in places like Philadelphia and Pennsylvania as a whole. This is something where violence is getting intimidated. Both sides want to win. This is an election where it's been said by the media that no matter who wins, there's going to be attacks from the other side. We see it in major cities like New York, where people are boarding up windows, where they're boarding up store windows in downtown to prepare for any sort of rioting from the result of this election, whether it be Trump winning and the Biden side rioting or Biden winning and the Trump side rioting.
And not to mention, everyone should have the right to vote safely. And voter intimidation and suppression does take away that right to bring fear into the voting process. Frank, what's your take on this?
I think it's very unfortunate what is going on right now. People who are just going out and doing their duty to vote are being harassed, and it's terrible thing. And just everything that's been going on, especially how I reiterated before, the Trump administration, what they wanted to do with suppression and mail-in ballots, it's caused a reaction by people who are against mail-in ballots to go out and essentially scare people out of going to the polls and voting.
Exactly, and it's not just physical, it's also in terms of robocalls. People have been receiving calls, especially in New York. It's been really heavy here, saying don't vote or threatening messages on their cell phones and on their landlines. So voter suppression has many forms.
It does, and those forms have been coming to a head in this election. I think the biggest one that maybe we haven't talked about that much, or we've mentioned it a couple of times, is Trump's rhetoric as well. At his first debate, he said, go out and watch the polls. Go out and stay there. Make sure no one's attacking, taking away your right to vote. He is calling out his people to suppress votes and intimidate people not to vote or to vote for Donald Trump. You can't do that. That's unconstitutional. And we've seen this play out again and again in Pennsylvania this year after that dangerous rhetoric.
Exactly. No one should go out to vote with the sense of fear that they will be physically harmed in that process. And Donald Trump's rhetoric does enable people on the right, on the extreme right, just to be specific, to incite violence, especially in terms of the voting process. And that's why I think a lot of people do choose to vote absentee, because there is a safety aspect in that you can easily fill out the ballot in the comfort of your own home and send it in. But with the controversy over mail-in ballots, that process isn't that safe, and Donald Trump does tear down absentee ballots and mail-in voting a lot.
And we're seeing this issue in urban areas as well. Let's look at Baldwin, New York again. Baldwin, New York has 3 polling places: Baldwin Senior High School, the Hastings District Office, and also American Legion Post, all with 3 posts. Baldwin is a town of over 100,000 people in there. Baldwin is also a primarily Black and Hispanic community. Voter suppression takes its form, too, in not having enough polling places to vote. The average time to vote at these places was over an hour and a half, compared to Long Beach, where it was just 10 to 20 minutes to get your vote in, register, and get out. You can't have this. And to have this voter suppression, even today where people can get taken away, the right not to vote, the right that you might not get to vote because the line is too long, or that you're pushed away, it is too much to have, and it is not something we can have in the 21st century.
All right, we're going to throw it to Dan in our mixing site, our New Jersey and Connecticut correspondent. Dan, what are you seeing?
There is a huge story going on in New Jersey, one of the most competitive congressional House races in the country. Jeff Van Drew, a Republican who switched from the Democratic to Republican Party in protest of Trump's impeachment against rising Democratic challenger Amy Kennedy. This is a huge, potentially game-deciding race for Republicans in New Jersey because District 2 down south is New Jersey's largest county. And you got to remember, this is something that, again, with Democrats maintaining control in New Jersey, Republicans need to find some sort of way to stay afloat, and keeping on to Jeff Van Drew's coalition that elected him as a Democrat could potentially retain him as a Republican. This is a huge win for Republicans potentially in New Jersey. And when you look at this county, they voted for President Trump narrowly, 50.6%. It's majority white with only small fragments of minority voters. Van Drew has a legit shot to win again, and this could be a very big surprise. It's an absolute toss-up. We don't know what's going on, and this could be big for Republicans in New Jersey. Back to you guys.
And thank you very much once again to our New Jersey and Connecticut correspondent, Dan DeCrescenzo. Again, both New Jersey and Connecticut going blue, so not a surprise there.
All right, we're going to go over to Crystal at our national anchor.
We're actually going to wrap up the night. It was a wild night covering regional elections, both races in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New York, especially in New York City and Long Island. It's been a crazy night. A lot of unexpected races tonight, especially during this unprecedented year where politics has intersected with with coronavirus, and it's been incredible to be here alongside both of you to cover this historic night.
It has, Rachel, and you've also made it great. Frank, you too. It's been a pleasure to do this for everyone tonight. It's been amazing to have this experience with everyone, to have this, to be able to share our stories of the regional side, to share the story of the average Long Islander, the New York City girl, the Long Island kid, everyone, to present these stories and take it more. And all of this isn't possible without you going out to vote. And most importantly, I always say thank you to this, the behind-the-scenes people, our camera people, our producers, our everyone. We might look great on camera. You guys put us on air. We thank you so much for that. Our regional executive producers, Caitlin O'Brien and Jason Siegel, you guys made this happen along with everyone else. Thank you for all you've done.
We've had so many mentors guiding us throughout this entire process as college students to put on this broadcast. Frank, do you have any closing words?
Max, Rachel, I couldn't be more fortunate to be doing this with y'all tonight. It's such an historical event covering this election. But that will be all for Hofstra Votes Live coverage of the regional side of the 2020 election cycle. We'd like to thank everyone at the national desk for their hard work during this program, and we also like to extend a huge thank you to all the members of Hofstra Votes Live who work both on and off the camera to make this show possible. Have a good night and stay safe. Now we're going to actually throw it to the national anchors, Crystal.
Thank you, Regional Desk. I actually want to give this over to Eli. Eli, do you have any last-minute words?
Well, first we're going to take a look at the decision desk for one final crunch of the numbers.
Oh, I thought we were wrapping it up.
For a final check-in here at the decision desk, I'm with head decision desk manager Faith. Faith, can you give us a quick wrap of the night thus far?
Yeah, so as we're closing out the night, former Vice President Biden has 209 electoral votes, while President Donald Trump is at 118. This is obviously a very contentious electoral map and will run long into the night as we see states like Ohio, North Carolina, Florida are still very, very much up in the air, and that will be coming along later in tonight.
Now, with the fact that we have all these mail-in ballots that still have to get counted, we were only able to crunch the data from the in-person polling. What do you think that means, that now we have an election where we may not know the president for the next couple days at least?
Well, my biggest advice would just be to stand by and keep watching, because these numbers are going to change as the days go on. That's just the nature of absentee ballots, and especially now that there's different rules in different states as to how long they can be counted.
If there was one state whose results surprised you the most tonight, or whose lack of results surprised you, what would you say?
I mean, Florida is obviously the one that comes to mind first. Florida is that one that everyone's watching. And the fact that with 99% reporting, there's still no call, you know, it makes me want to ask a lot of questions for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Faith. Now we're going to toss over to the newsroom.
I'm ready. Hello, everybody. I am here with racial injustice expert Victoria Bell. Now, Victoria, what are Biden and Trump's plans for African Americans going forward?
So starting with Trump, as we know, he's constantly claimed to have done more for the Black community than even Abraham Lincoln. So what he's got going on for this upcoming election is what he calls a platinum plan, which is a $500 billion investment that's going to go towards the Black community. Some things that he has in store is creating 3 million new jobs, as well as 500,000 Black-owned businesses. And he also wants to help reform the education and healthcare system. As for Biden, he's really focusing on minimizing the racial gaps that we see in today's society. So for example, he wants to really focus on the wealth and income gaps that are a big disparity within the African American community. He also wants to expand education and make investments in the healthcare system. Lastly, his big focus is to improve the Black vote and just make sure to grant equal protection.
Now, that sounds very interesting. Now, let's go over to Long Island. Now, Long Island has a history of segregation, whether that's housing segregation. Can you just elaborate on that, please?
Definitely. So the segregation that we see on Long Island can be traced back to post-World War II. William Levitt, the founder of Levittown, made it so that Black home buyers could not live there. It was for white veterans coming back from the war. And so that was obviously a form of redlining, which was outlawed, but unfortunately the effects still are seen today. We can just look outside of Hofstra, Garden City versus Hempstead. Why is there that disparity? It's because of the history of Long Island and segregation. And lastly, we can see that also in the school systems. because a lot of times the lower ratings go right hand in hand with the way that the communities are. And so a lot of home buyers will not want to have their kids go to schools with lower ratings, which oftentimes are from the Black community.
Victoria, thank you so much for your insights. Much appreciated. Now, Eli, back to you.
Thank you, Jermaine, in the newsroom. Final thoughts on the night. Crystal, Eddie, let's recap. Crystal, let's go to you first. What are your final thoughts on this evening as we're closing out?
Well, Eli, we've definitely seen a lot tonight, especially looking at the states. A lot of the final results that we have seen so far, definitely unexpected. Right now, the electoral count is still 209 to 118, 209 belonging to Joe Biden in favor of being our next president. Eddie, what do you think about the states that we've seen tonight and the overall result?
Well, I think if you want a better picture of this election, you're going to have to wait for Michigan and Wisconsin. But that's pretty much it. Eli, you are the senior at this table. I feel it's only just if you take us away.
Well, that'll do it for tonight's coverage of Hofstra Votes Live, the 2020 election coverage. Thank you so much to the remarkable producers, tech crew, talent that helped make this evening possible, as well as the staff that spent months of their time putting this amazing production together in tandem with the Hofstra Chronicle. This has been Heat and WRHU Hempstead. Here on the national desk has been Crystal Bermudez, Eddie Fitzgerald, and I'm Eli Finkelson. Have a great night.